4 lawyers in black suits stepped through the cafe door, flanked by bodyguards, and every conversation died. Eli Martinez froze behind the counter, his hands still gripping the coffee pot he'd used to serve the grumpy old man for 8 weeks straight. The lead attorney's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Martinez, Henry Whitmore has passed away. His will requires your immediate presence." Eli's world tilted. He'd only poured the man coffee. What he didn't know was that those simple acts of kindness had just made him a millionaire and ignited a war. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want you to stay with me until the very end because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. And please, comment below with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels around the world. The fluorescent lights of Beacon Street Cafe flickered at 6:47 a.m., casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor that Eli Martinez had mopped for the 3rd time that week. His reflection in the coffee machine looked back at him. 32 years old but feeling 50, dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep could erase, shoulders perpetually hunched from carrying invisible weight. "Table 6 needs a refill," barked Sandra, the day manager, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't look up from her phone, thumbs scrolling endlessly through someone else's perfect life, while Eli lived his imperfect one in real time. "On it," Eli muttered, grabbing the coffee pot with hands that still bore yesterday's dishwashing burns. The ceramic handle was warm, familiar, the only constant in a life that seemed determined to keep shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. He'd been working at Beacon Street Cafe for 11 months now. 11 months since the accident that took his wife, Marie. 11 months since he became a single father to 6-year-old Ben. 11 months of drowning in medical bills, funeral costs, and a mortgage that laughed at his paychecks like a cruel joke with no punchline. The cafe itself was a relic from another era, red vinyl booths with duct tape covering the tears, laminated menus sticky with decades of syrup and broken dreams, walls the color of nicotine stains even though smoking had been banned for years. It smelled like burnt coffee, bacon grease, and desperation. In other words, it smelled like home. Eli moved through the morning rush on autopilot, his body performing a choreography it had memorized through repetition and necessity. Coffee for the construction workers who never tipped. Eggs over easy for the nurse finishing her night shift. Pancakes for the college student who'd been crying in the bathroom for 10 minutes before ordering. He saw everything. That was his gift and his curse. At 7:03 a.m., the bell above the door chimed, a sound that would change Eli's life forever, though he didn't know it yet. The old man entered like a storm cloud, all gray and heavy with the weight of untold stories. He was somewhere between 70 and ancient, with shoulders that curved forward as if the world had been pressing down on them for decades. His clothes were expensive once, a wool coat that might have been tailored in better times, leather shoes that had walked countless miles. But now everything hung on him like memories that no longer quite fit. "Good morning, sir," Eli said warmly, because that's what Marie would have wanted. She'd always said that kindness cost nothing, which was good, because nothing was exactly what Eli could afford to give these days. The old man didn't respond. His eyes, pale blue and watery, swept across the cafe like security cameras scanning for threats. When they landed on the corner booth by the window, something flickered across his weathered face. Recognition? Relief? Eli couldn't tell. Without a word, the man shuffled to that booth and sat down heavily, as if the act of remaining upright had finally become too exhausting to maintain. "I'll be right with you," Eli called out, but the man gave no indication he'd heard. He simply stared out the window at Beacon Street, watching the city wake up, watching life happen to other people. Sandra appeared at Eli's elbow, smelling like cigarettes and cheap perfume. "Don't waste your time on that one," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "He comes in, sits for hours, orders one coffee, never tips. Real piece of work." "How long has he been coming here?" Eli asked, watching the old man's trembling hands as they rested on the table like wounded birds. "Few weeks. Maybe a month. Nobody knows his name. Nobody cares." Sandra shrugged, already turning away. "Just don't expect anything from him. Some people are just takers, Eli. Remember that." But Eli couldn't remember that, wouldn't remember that. Because when he looked at the old man, he didn't see a bad tipper or a waste of time. He saw someone who was hurting in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the soul. He grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and approached the corner booth. "Morning, sir," Eli said gently, as if speaking to a spooked animal. "Coffee?" The old man's eyes slowly focused on Eli's face, and for a moment something passed between them. A recognition of shared pain, perhaps, or simply two people who understood what it meant to carry burdens no one else could see. "Black," the man rasped, his voice like gravel grinding against concrete. "Coming right up." Eli poured the coffee with steady hands, despite the exhaustion that made his bones feel like they were made of lead. "Can I get you anything to eat? The breakfast special is toast, wheat, no butter." "You got it." As Eli turned to leave, the old man spoke again. "Your hands." Eli paused, looking down at his reddened, work-worn hands. "What about them?" "They shake, but you pour steady. That takes discipline." It was the most the old man had said, and Eli didn't quite know how to respond. "I guess when you can't afford to spill, you learn not to," he finally said, attempting a smile that felt more like a grimace. The old man nodded once, slowly, and returned his gaze to the window. The toast came up 3 minutes later. Eli placed it in front of the old man, who stared at it like it was a puzzle he'd forgotten how to solve. His hands reached out, trembling badly now, fingers fumbling with the knife. Eli watched for 10 seconds. 20. The old man's jaw clenched with frustration, his pride clearly warring with his body's betrayal. The knife clattered onto the plate. "Would you mind if I—" Eli asked softly, picking up the knife before the man could refuse. The old man's shoulders sagged, defeat written in every line of his body. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. Eli cut the toast into 4 neat squares, exactly the way he cut Ben's sandwiches. "There you go, sir." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why what?" "Why help me? Your boss watches you like a hawk. You lose tips standing here. Why waste your time?" Eli thought about lying, about giving some noble answer about human decency or paying it forward, but something about this man demanded honesty. Because someone should. Because you're here. Because— He paused, searching for the right words. "Because if I don't help when I can, what's the point of any of this?" The old man's eyes glistened, but he blinked rapidly, banishing whatever emotion had threatened to surface. "You're a fool." "Yeah," Eli agreed with a sad smile. "I've been told that before." "Fools don't last long in this city. Then I guess I better help people while I still can." Something shifted in the old man's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around the edges of his perpetual scowl. He picked up a piece of toast with still trembling fingers and took a bite. Eli returned to his other tables, but he found himself watching the corner booth from the corner of his eye. The old man sat there for exactly 43 minutes, making that single piece of toast and coffee last as if they were precious resources that needed to be rationed. When he finally stood to leave, his movements were slow, painful, each joint clearly protesting. He shuffled to the register where Eli waited. "That'll be $3.47, Eli said. The old man pulled out a worn leather wallet and placed $4 on the counter. "Keep it." 53 cents. Sandra had been right about the tipping. "Thank you, sir. Have a good day." The old man paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Without turning around, he said, "Henry, my name is Henry." "Good to meet you, Henry. I'm Eli." Henry nodded once and disappeared into the morning crowds of Beacon Street. The next morning, Henry was back at 7:03 a.m. exactly, as if he'd timed his arrival with a stopwatch. Same booth, same order, same trembling hands that couldn't quite manage the simple task of preparing his own breakfast. Eli cut his toast into 4 squares without being asked. "You remembered," Henry observed, his tone unreadable. "Seemed important," Eli replied. This became their routine. Every morning, 7 days a week, Henry appeared like clockwork. Black coffee, wheat toast, 4 squares, 53-cent tip. Sandra made her displeasure known. "That old man is costing us money. He takes up a booth during breakfast rush and barely orders anything. You need to encourage him to order more or move along." "He's a paying customer, Sandra." "Barely, and you spend too much time on him. Other customers are complaining about slow service. I'll work faster. See that you do. Because I'm watching, Eli. One more complaint and I'm cutting your hours. Don't think I won't. Eli couldn't afford to lose hours. Ben needed new shoes. The electric bill was overdue again. The car was making a sound that definitely meant expensive repairs in the near future. But every time he looked at Henry sitting alone in that corner booth, staring out at a world that had stopped including him, Eli couldn't bring himself to rush the old man out the door. The third week, Henry spoke more than usual. You have shadows under your eyes. Do I? Eli touched his face self-consciously. You work too hard. This place doesn't deserve you. It pays the bills. Mostly. Mostly. Henry repeated the word like it tasted bitter. What bills could possibly be worth killing yourself over? Eli hadn't planned to tell him. Hadn't planned to tell anyone. But something about Henry's directness, the way he asked questions without the usual social niceties that allowed for comfortable lies, made the truth spill out. I have a son, Ben. He's 6. His mother, my wife, died in a car accident last year. The insurance didn't cover everything. Medical bills, funeral costs, therapy for Ben because he has nightmares. Eli's voice cracked slightly. I work here during the day, then I do overnight stocking at the grocery store 3 nights a week. My neighbor watches Ben, and I pay her what I can, but it's never enough. Nothing's ever enough. Henry was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Eli had ever heard it. You're a good father. Those 4 words hit Eli harder than any insult could have. His eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall in the middle of his shift. I'm trying to be. Some days I'm not sure I'm succeeding. The fact that you try, that you keep trying despite everything, that's what makes you good. Henry's trembling hand reached across the table, hovering for a moment before awkwardly patting Eli's wrist once. Your son is lucky to have you. Thank you, Eli whispered, his throat tight. That means more than you know. After that conversation, something changed between them. Not friendship exactly. Henry was too guarded, too wrapped in layers of old pain for friendship, but something approaching mutual respect. Henry began asking questions about Ben. What did he like to do? Was he good in school? What were his dreams? Eli answered everything, grateful for someone who wanted to hear about his son, who saw Ben as a person rather than just another obligation in Eli's overwhelmed life. He loves drawing, Eli said one morning while refilling Henry's coffee. Covers every surface in the apartment with his pictures, mostly superheroes saving people. He's got this whole universe he's created where everyone has a special power. What's your power in his universe? Eli laughed, surprised by the question. I'm not in it, just the heroes. Henry frowned. You don't think you're a hero? I'm just doing what I have to do. That's precisely what makes someone a hero. Not the wanting to do it, but the doing it anyway when every fiber of your being wants to quit. Henry fixed Eli with an intense stare. Your son sees it even if you don't. Week 5 brought the first real smile Eli had seen on Henry's face. It happened when Eli mentioned that Ben had gotten a gold star in reading class. Reading is important, Henry said, and for a moment his eyes seemed to focus on something far away. My wife used to say that reading was how you lived 1,000 lives instead of just one. She read constantly. Everything. Novels, newspapers, cereal boxes. His smile turned sad. She's gone now. Has been for 7 years. I'm sorry, Eli said, meaning it. Don't be. She had a good life. We had a good life. Henry's smile faded entirely. I just wish I'd appreciated it more while I had it. You always think there's more time. There never is. Is that why you come here every morning? This booth? Henry's gaze drifted to the window. This cafe. Years ago, it belonged to someone else. Different name, different owners, but the same booth. My wife and I used to come here on Sunday mornings. She'd order French toast. I'd get the eggs Benedict that they don't make anymore. We'd sit here for hours, watching the world go by, planning our future. He touched the table almost reverently. This was our spot, where everything good began. Eli understood then. This wasn't just a booth. It was a shrine, a time machine, the last place where Henry could still feel connected to someone he'd lost. She would have liked you, Henry said suddenly. Maggie. That was her name. She would have said you had a good heart. She could always tell about people. I wish I could have met her. So do I. Henry's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. So do I. By week 7, the other regulars had noticed the unusual relationship between Eli and the grumpy old man. What's the story with you and Grandpa Scrooge, Volk? Asked Tommy, one of the construction workers who came in every morning reeking of cigarettes and testosterone. No story. He's just a customer. Bullshit. You treat him like royalty while the rest of us have to flag you down for a coffee refill. What gives? Maybe if you said please once in a while, I'd refill your coffee faster, Eli shot back, surprising himself with the sharpness in his tone. Tommy raised his hands in mock surrender. Whoa, touchy. All I'm saying is the old guy gets special treatment, makes the rest of us wonder what we're doing wrong. You could start by leaving a tip that's more than spare change, Eli muttered, walking away before the conversation could escalate. But Tommy's words stuck with him. Was he giving Henry special treatment? Yes, definitely yes. But not because Henry deserved it more than anyone else, because Henry needed it more. There was a difference, though Eli suspected people like Tommy would never understand it. Sandra certainly didn't. The old man situation is getting out of hand, she informed Eli during his break. He's here for over an hour every morning, taking up prime real estate during our busiest time. Either he starts ordering more or you need to move him along. Those are your options. I'll handle it, Eli said, though he had no intention of doing anything of the sort. See that you do, because the owner's been asking questions about our revenue, and I need to show improvement. If that means losing dead weight, customer or employee, then that's what happens. The threat was clear. Eli's job hung by a thread, and that thread was wearing thin. That night, as Eli tucked Ben into bed in their cramped one-bedroom apartment, his son asked, Daddy, why do you look so sad? I'm not sad, buddy, just tired. Tired looks different. You're sad. Ben's 6-year-old wisdom was sometimes terrifying in its accuracy. Is it because of the mean lady at work? How do you know about her? You talk in your sleep sometimes. You say, yes, Sandra, in your grumpy voice. Ben demonstrated, and despite everything, Eli had to laugh. I do not sound like that. Do too. Ben giggled, then grew serious again. If she's mean to you, why do you work there? Because we need the money, Ben, and sometimes we have to deal with mean people to get what we need. That's stupid. Yeah, Eli agreed, ruffling his son's hair. Yeah, it kind of is. When I grow up, I'm going to be rich, and then you won't have to work for mean people anymore. Eli's heart cracked a little. You know what, buddy? You're already making me richer than any amount of money could. You know why? Why? Because I get to be your dad. That's the best job in the whole world. Ben hugged him tightly, his small arms surprisingly strong. You're the best dad in the whole world, too. As Eli turned off the light and closed the door, he leaned against the hallway wall and let himself have 30 seconds of tears. 30 seconds to feel the crushing weight of single parenthood, of poverty, of exhaustion so deep it had become part of his DNA. Then he wiped his eyes, straightened his shoulders, and went to prepare for his overnight shift at the grocery store. 3 hours of sleep would have to be enough. It always had to be enough. Week 8 began with the Saturday that would change everything, though Eli didn't know it yet. His usual babysitter, Mrs. Chen from apartment 3B, called at 5:30 a.m. with the flu. I'm so sorry, Eli. I can barely stand up. There's no way I can watch Ben today. Eli's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. Don't worry about it, Mrs. Chen. Feel better. He hung up and stared at his sleeping son, panic rising in his chest like floodwater. He couldn't miss his shift. Sandra would use it as an excuse to cut his hours or fire him altogether. But he couldn't leave Ben alone. The apartment complex had a strict policy about unattended children, and even if they didn't, Eli would never forgive himself if something happened. There was only one option, though it violated several cafe policies and would definitely anger Sandra. At 6:15 a.m., Eli and Ben walked hand in hand to Beacon Street Cafe. Ben carried his backpack full of coloring books, crayons, and the battered paperback of Where the Wild Things Are, that he'd already memorized but still loved. "Remember the rules," Eli said as they approached the cafe door. "Sit quietly at table 12 in the back. Don't bother the customers. If you need anything, you come find me, okay?" "Okay, Daddy. I promise I'll be good." "You're always good, buddy. I'm just sorry you have to spend your Saturday here instead of at the park." "It's okay. I like watching you work. You make people happy." Eli's throat tightened. "I try, Ben. I really try." Sandra's expression when she saw Ben could have curdled milk. "What is that?" "That is my son, Ben. My sitter is sick, and I had no other options. He'll sit quietly in the back. You won't even know he's here." "This is completely against—" "I know, and I'm sorry. But I'm here, I'm ready to work, and I will do twice the work of anyone else on the floor today. Please, Sandra. I need this job." Something in Eli's desperation must have penetrated Sandra's armor because she sighed heavily. "Fine. But if there's even one complaint, one, you're both out of here. Understood?" "Understood. Thank you." Eli got Ben settled at table 12 with strict instructions to stay put, then threw himself into the morning rush with manic energy. He poured coffee, took orders, delivered plates, cleared tables, all while keeping one eye on his son, who sat coloring with intense concentration. At 7:03 a.m., Henry walked through the door. Eli's heart sank. Of all the days for Ben to be here, it had to be the day when the grumpiest, most unpredictable regular showed up. What if Henry complained? What if seeing a child in the cafe triggered some old man rage that got both Eli and Ben thrown out? But Henry's reaction was nothing Eli could have predicted. The old man stopped dead in his tracks, his watery blue eyes fixed on Ben with an expression that was equal parts shock and something else, something that looked almost like longing. Eli hurried over. "Good morning, Henry. Your usual booth is ready." Henry didn't move. "That boy, who is he?" "That's my son, Ben. My sitter was sick and I had to bring him to work. I promise he won't disturb anyone." "Your son," Henry repeated, and his voice carried a weight that made Eli pause. "Yes, sir. I know it's unusual, but bring him to my booth." Eli blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your son. Let him sit with me." Henry's command left no room for argument, but his tone was softer than Eli had ever heard it. "Henry, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to impose. But Ben can stay in the back." "I'm asking, please." The word please sounded rusty in Henry's mouth, as if it hadn't been used in years. "Let the boy sit with me." Eli looked from Henry to Ben and back again, trying to calculate the risks. But something in Henry's expression, a vulnerability, a desperate kind of hope, made him nod. "Let me ask him. If he's comfortable, then okay." Eli crouched next to Ben's table. "Hey, buddy, see that man over there? His name is Mr. Henry. He's asked if you'd like to sit with him while you color. Would you like that?" Ben studied Henry with the serious consideration only children can muster. "Is he nice?" Eli struggled for the right word. "He's lonely, Ben. I think having you sit with him would make him happy, but only if you want to. Will you be close by?" "I'll be right here the whole time. If you feel uncomfortable at all, you just come find me, okay?" "Okay." Ben gathered his coloring supplies. "Will Mr. Henry color with me?" "You can ask him." Eli led Ben to the corner booth, his heart hammering with an anxiety he couldn't quite name. "Henry, this is my son. Ben, this is This is Henry." Ben climbed into the booth with the fearlessness of children who haven't yet learned that the world can be cruel. "Hi, Mr. Henry. Do you want to color with me?" For a long moment, Henry just stared at the boy. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his weathered face. A real smile, not the bitter grimace he usually wore. "I would love to color with you, Ben." Eli brought them both their usual orders, black coffee and toast for Henry, hot chocolate and pancakes for Ben, then retreated to give them space while still keeping them in sight. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Henry, the man who barely spoke, who seemed to view human interaction as a necessary evil, came alive. He leaned over Ben's coloring book, offering suggestions about color choices and staying in the lines. When Ben showed him a picture, Henry studied it with the seriousness of an art critic examining a masterpiece. This is very good, Henry said, holding up a drawing of what might have been a dragon or possibly a very angry dog. You have talent. Thank you. My dad says I'm a good drawer. Do you draw? Not in many years, but I used to when I was young like you. How old are you? Ben, Eli called from across the cafe. We don't ask people their age. But Henry was laughing, actually laughing, a sound that made several other customers turn and stare. It's all right. I'm 74 years old, Ben, very, very old. That's not that old. My great-grandma is 86 and she can still touch her toes. Can she really? That's impressive. Can you touch your toes? Henry looked down at his trembling hands, then back at Ben. No, I'm afraid I can't. My body doesn't work as well as it used to. That's okay. My dad says bodies are like cars. Sometimes they need repairs, but that doesn't mean they're broken forever. Henry's eyes found Eli's across the cafe, and something passed between them. Gratitude, respect, a shared understanding of pain and resilience. For 2 hours, Eli watched his worlds collide in the most unexpected way. Ben showed Henry every picture in his coloring book. Henry taught Ben simple addition using sugar packets as counting tools. They played tic-tac-toe on napkins. They discussed important matters like the best flavor of ice cream, Henry, vanilla, Ben, chocolate, and whether dinosaurs could have been good pets. Ben, yes, absolutely, Henry. That might have been problematic. At one point, Ben pulled out a drawing from his backpack, one Eli had never seen before. It showed 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands under a smiling sun. Above it, in Ben's careful handwriting, my dad, my hero. Henry held the picture with shaking hands, staring at it for so long that Eli worried something was wrong. When Henry finally looked up, his eyes were swimming with tears. May I keep this? Henry asked, his voice hoarse. Ben looked uncertain. It's for my dad. Then we should give it to him, but perhaps you could draw me something similar for my wall. Really? You want one of my pictures? I would be honored to have one of your pictures. Ben's face lit up like Times Square at midnight. He immediately began drawing with renewed enthusiasm, his tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when he was focused. 20 minutes later, he presented Henry with a new drawing. This one showed 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Dad, a small one labeled Ben, and a medium one in a bow tie labeled Mr. Henry. They all stood in front of a building with a sign reading coffee shop. Henry's hands trembled worse than ever as he accepted the drawing. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has given me in 7 years. Thank you, Ben. You're welcome. Now you won't be lonely anymore because you'll have us on your wall. Something broke in Henry's face then. The careful walls he'd constructed crumbled, and tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. You're right. I won't be lonely anymore. Ben, with the emotional intelligence of children who've had to grow up too fast, didn't shy away from Henry's tears. Instead, he reached across the table and patted Henry's trembling hand. It's okay to cry, Mr. Henry. My dad says crying is just your heart letting out feelings that are too big to stay inside. Henry laughed through his tears. Your father is a very wise man. I know. He's the best. When the breakfast rush finally ended and it was time for Henry to leave, the old man stood slowly, carefully tucking Ben's drawing into his coat pocket. Same time tomorrow? Ben asked hopefully. Henry looked at Eli, seeking permission. If Mr. Henry wants to come back, he's always welcome, Eli said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Then I'll be here, Henry promised. And perhaps we can play chess? Do you know chess, Ben? No, but I want to learn. Then I'll teach you. It's a game of strategy and patience. I think you'll be very good at it. Before leaving, Henry pulled Eli aside. His expression was serious now, the walls rebuilding themselves. Your son is extraordinary. He has your heart, kind, brave, willing to sit with an old fool who doesn't deserve such grace. You're not a fool, Henry, and Ben obviously adores you. I haven't felt this alive in 7 years, Henry's voice cracked. Since my Maggie died, I've just been existing, going through motions, waiting. But today, with your boy, I remembered what it felt like to be human again, to matter. You've always mattered, Henry. Not to anyone who knew my name, not like this. He gripped Eli's shoulder with surprising strength. You're raising him right. Your wife would be proud. I hope so. God, I hope so. Henry nodded once, then shuffled toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Same time Monday. Tell Ben I'll bring a chess set. He'll be back with his regular sitter on Monday, but I'll let him know. Maybe next Saturday? Henry's face fell, then recovered. Next Saturday, then. Don't let him forget old Henry. I don't think that's possible. As the door closed behind Henry, Sandra materialized at Eli's elbow. What was that about? Just a customer saying goodbye. That customer spent 2 hours with your kid and ordered 1 coffee. That's not sustainable, Eli. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're letting personal feelings interfere with business. That old man is taking advantage of your soft heart, and your soft heart is going to get you fired. Eli bit back the retort burning on his tongue. I'll do better. I'll work faster. I'll take shorter breaks. See that you do. Sandra walked away, leaving Eli standing in the middle of the cafe, wondering how showing basic human kindness had become something he needed to apologize for. That night, as Eli put Ben to bed, his son wouldn't stop talking about Mr. Henry. Did you know he used to travel all over the world? And he's been to 47 countries? And he can speak 3 languages? He's so cool, Dad. He certainly is interesting, Eli agreed, smiling despite his exhaustion. Can we see him again soon? I want to learn chess. He'll be here next Saturday, he promised. That's so far away. Ben's disappointment was palpable. Time will fly, buddy. You'll see. But time, as it turned out, was the one thing they didn't have. Monday morning, 7:03 a.m. Eli stood behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, waiting. 7:15. The corner booth remained empty. 7:30. Nothing. At 7:45, Eli started to worry. Henry was never late. Never. In 8 weeks, he'd been there at 7:03 a.m. every single day, as reliable as the sunrise. By 8 o'clock, worry had transformed into something darker, something that sat in Eli's stomach like a stone. Where's your old man friend? Sandra asked, and there was something almost gleeful in her tone, as if Henry's absence proved a point she'd been trying to make. I don't know. Maybe he finally figured out there are other cafes in this city, ones where the staff doesn't hover. Eli didn't respond. He couldn't. Because a voice in his head, the same voice that had warned him about Marie's headache the day before her aneurysm, was screaming that something was wrong. The morning crawled by. Each time the door opened, Eli's head snapped up, hoping to see Henry shuffle through. But it was always someone else. Always. At 9 o'clock a.m., the bell above the door chimed, and 4 men entered. They wore black suits that probably cost more than Eli made in 3 months. Their expressions were serious, professional, the kind of faces that delivered bad news with practiced efficiency. Behind them, 2 more men, broader, harder, clearly security of some kind. Bodyguards. The cafe fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even Sandra's phone scrolling paused. The lead man, mid-50s, gray temples, eyes that had seen everything and been impressed by nothing, scanned the room until his gaze landed on Eli. Are you Eli Martinez? Eli's mouth went dry. Yes. My name is Richard Anderson. I'm the personal attorney for Mr. Henry Whitmore. He paused, and in that pause, Eli heard everything he needed to know. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Mr. Whitmore passed away yesterday evening. The coffee pot slipped from Eli's hand. It shattered on the floor, hot liquid spreading like blood, but Eli barely noticed. The world had narrowed to a single pinpoint of pain. What? I'm sorry for your loss. I understand you and Mr. Whitmore had formed a friendship. Eli's voice cracked. He was just here Saturday. He promised to teach my son chess. He promised... Anderson's expression softened slightly. Mr. Whitmore's will contains a clause requiring your immediate presence for the reading. I have a car waiting outside. If you could come with us now, I'd appreciate it. I'm working. I can't just leave. I think you'll find that your employer will grant you this time. Anderson glanced at Sandra, who looked as shocked as Eli felt. This is a matter of some urgency. Eli, go. Sandra said, and for once there was no sharpness in her voice, only confusion and something that might have been concern. "We'll manage." Eli moved on autopilot, removing his apron, grabbing his jacket. The attorneys flanked him like an honor guard as they walked toward the door. Behind him, he heard the cafe explode into whispers and speculation, but Eli couldn't process any of it. His mind was stuck on a single image. Henry's smile as he accepted Ben's drawing, the way he'd said, "I won't be lonely anymore." Had he known? Had Henry somehow known these were his last days? Was that why he'd opened up so suddenly? Why he'd wanted to spend time with Ben? Why everything had felt so urgent on Saturday? Outside, a black Mercedes waited at the curb. Anderson opened the door, and Eli climbed inside, feeling like he was entering another world, one where the seats were leather, the air was climate-controlled, and old men who shared morning coffee didn't just die without warning. "Where are we going?" Eli asked as the car pulled into traffic. "Downtown, to our firm. The reading of Mr. Whitmore's will is scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. "But why do I need to be there? I barely knew him. We shared coffee a few times, that's all." Anderson turned to face him, and something in his expression made Eli's breath catch. "Mr. Martinez, with all due respect, I don't think you understand. You weren't just a casual acquaintance to Mr. Whitmore. In fact, you may have been the most important person in his life these past 2 months." "That's impossible. We barely spoke before last week. He never even told me his last name." "No, he wouldn't have. Mr. Whitmore was an intensely private man, especially after his wife's death. He cut himself off from most of the world. But something about you—" Anderson paused, choosing his words carefully. "Something about you reminded him why life was worth living. That's not a small thing, Mr. Martinez. That's everything." Eli stared out the window as Manhattan scrolled past, each building a monument to wealth and power that existed in a completely different universe from his own. "I still don't understand why I'm here. What could Henry possibly have left me?" Anderson smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent chills down Eli's spine. "I think you'll find that Mr. Whitmore was full of surprises. In fact, I guarantee that what you're about to learn will change your life forever." "Change my life? I'm a broke single dad working 2 jobs to keep a roof over my son's head. Nothing changes that except lottery tickets and miracles, and I don't believe in either." "Then, Mr. Martinez," Anderson said softly, "perhaps today is the day you start believing." The car turned onto Park Avenue, pulling up in front of a glass tower that reached toward the sky like a middle finger to everyone who couldn't afford to enter its doors. Gold letters above the entrance proclaimed, "Anderson, Whitmore and Associates, Attorneys at Law." Whitmore. The name hit Eli like a physical blow. "Wait, your firm is named after Henry?" Mr. Henry Whitmore was one of the founding partners, yes, though he'd been retired for 7 years since his wife Maggie passed away. Henry was a lawyer? A founding partner? Eli's voice rose with each word, hysteria creeping in at the edges. Mr. Whitmore was many things, Mr. Martinez. A lawyer, a businessman, a philanthropist. At the time of his death, his personal wealth was estimated at approximately $87 million. The world tilted. The sky swapped places with the ground. Eli gripped the car door handle to keep from falling over even though he was sitting down. 87 million. But he came to the cafe every day, ordered toast and coffee, tipped 53 cents. He wore old clothes. He was just an old man who needed help cutting his toast. Yes, Anderson agreed. That's exactly what he was. And that Mr. Martinez is precisely why what's about to happen matters so much. The attorney opened the car door, gesturing for Eli to exit. Come. There are people waiting for us, and I suspect they're not going to be happy to see you. Eli climbed out of the car on shaking legs, following Anderson and his entourage of lawyers and bodyguards into a world where the marble was real, the paintings were originals, and every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that only money could buy. In the elevator, rising toward the 42nd floor, Eli finally found his voice. Who's going to be unhappy to see me? Anderson's smile turned grim. Mr. Whitmore's daughter and grandson. They've been contesting his mental competency for the past 6 months, trying to gain control of his assets. They didn't visit him once after his wife died, but they're very interested in his money. The reading of the will should be interesting. And I'm here because, Mr. Martinez, you're named in that will. And something tells me that's going to cause quite a reaction. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a museum. A woman in a crisp suit led them down a hallway where the carpet was so thick it absorbed all sound, making their footsteps vanish as if they'd never existed. Anderson paused at a large wooden door. Before we go in, I want you to understand something. What Mr. Whitmore is giving you isn't just money or property. It's a responsibility, a legacy. He believed you were the right person to carry it forward. Don't let the reaction of his family convince you otherwise. I don't understand any of this. You will. Just remember, you earned this by being exactly who you are, by showing kindness when you had every reason to be bitter, by cutting an old man's toast because his hand shook too badly to do it himself. Those small acts mattered more than you could possibly know. Anderson opened the door, and Eli walked into a glass-walled conference room that overlooked Central Park. Seated at a long table were two people who looked like they'd been carved from ice in expensive disappointment. The woman, mid-40s, blonde highlights, designer everything, glared at Eli with such venom he took an involuntary step back. The man beside her, younger, handsome in a way that suggested personal trainers and weekend cocaine use, looked equally furious. "Who the hell is this?" the woman demanded. "This is Eli Martinez," Anderson said calmly, taking his seat at the head of the table and gesturing for Eli to sit. "He's here at Mr. Whitmore's request." "I don't care what my father requested. This is a family matter." "And yet here we are." Anderson opened a leather folder, removing a thick document. "Shall we begin?" The woman, Henry's daughter, looked like she wanted to argue, but Anderson's tone made it clear that wasn't an option. She sat back in her chair, arms crossed, radiating hostility. Anderson cleared his throat. "I am here to read the last will and testament of Henry James Whitmore, executed and signed on October 28th of this year." "October 28th," the grandson interrupted. "That was 3 days before he died. This will can't be legitimate. He wasn't in his right mind." "I assure you, Mr. Whitmore was thoroughly evaluated by 3 independent physicians, all of whom confirmed his mental competency. Any challenges to this will would be unsuccessful and expensive. Now, may I continue?" Silence, thick and hostile. "To my daughter, Victoria Whitmore Chase, I leave the sum of $5 million and the property located at 1247 Harbor View Drive in the Hamptons." Victoria's expression didn't change, but her jaw clenched. Clearly, she'd been expecting more. "To my grandson, Marcus Chase, I leave the sum of $5 million and the collection of vintage automobiles currently housed in the Greenwich storage facility." Marcus leaned back, a satisfied smirk on his face. "See, everything's fine. The old man came to his senses." "I'm not finished," Anderson said sharply. The smirk faded. Anderson's eyes found Eli's across the table. "To Mr. Eli Martinez, a man who showed me dignity and kindness when the world saw me only as an inconvenience, I leave the following." Eli couldn't breathe. The room had become an airless vacuum. "I leave Mr. Martinez the sum of $500,000, free and clear of any taxes or liens." The number didn't even sound real. $500,000. More money than Eli had ever imagined having. Enough to pay off every debt, to give Ben the childhood he deserved, to stop working themselves to death and just breathe. But Anderson wasn't finished. "I also leave Mr. Martinez full ownership of Beacon Street Cafe, including the building and property, with the understanding that he will maintain its character as a place where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, is treated with respect and dignity." Eli's vision blurred. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. "Furthermore," Anderson continued, his voice growing louder to be heard over Victoria's increasingly vocal protests, "I leave Mr. Martinez the Whitmore Legacy Trust, which contains $6 million in carefully managed assets, to be used at his discretion for charitable purposes, with a particular focus on supporting single parents and small businesses. The room exploded. Victoria was on her feet, screaming. Marcus was cursing. Someone's fist hit the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump, but Eli couldn't hear any of it. His ears were ringing, his heart was pounding, and his mind was trying to comprehend that his life had just changed so fundamentally that he couldn't even begin to process it. $6.5 million, a cafe, a trust, all because he'd cut an old man's toast. Anderson was still talking, still reading legal language that Eli couldn't follow. Victoria was threatening lawsuits. Marcus was demanding medical records. The bodyguards had moved to blocking positions near the door. And through it all, Eli sat frozen, thinking about Henry, about those pale blue eyes that had seen him, really seen him, when everyone else looked through him, about the way Henry had smiled at Ben's drawing, about his trembling hands holding that picture like it was made of gold instead of crayon. "This is bullshit!" Victoria's shriek cut through Eli's thoughts. My father was clearly being manipulated. This man obviously took advantage of him. "Be very careful with your next words, Ms. Whitmore Chase," Anderson interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. Mr. Martinez did nothing inappropriate. In fact, multiple witnesses at the cafe can attest that he was simply doing his job and doing it with a level of compassion that your father found profoundly moving. My father was senile. Your father was brilliant until the day he died. And he was very clear about his intentions. Anderson pulled out another document. He also left letters, one for each of you, and one for Mr. Martinez. He distributed 3 envelopes. Victoria and Marcus tore theirs open immediately, their expressions cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been shame as they read. Eli stared at his envelope. His name was written on the front in shaky handwriting, Henry's handwriting. "I'll give you a moment," Anderson said softly, and the attorneys and family members filed out, leaving Eli alone in the conference room with his envelope and the impossible reality of his new life. With trembling hands, hands that now shook as badly as Henry's ever had, Eli opened the letter and began to read. "Dear Eli, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry to leave without saying goodbye, but I've learned that goodbyes are harder when you say them out loud. So I'll say it this way. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I'd become invisible. Thank you for cutting my toast. Thank you for letting me meet your son. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in this cruel, beautiful world. You probably think I'm crazy. Why would I leave so much to a man I barely knew? But that's where you're wrong, Eli. I knew you better in 8 weeks than most people I've known for decades. I saw how you moved through the world, exhausted, overwhelmed, but still gentle, still kind, still willing to pause and help an old man who couldn't manage his breakfast. The money is for your freedom. Use it to give your son the life he deserves. Pay off your debts. Sleep without nightmares about bills. Stop working yourself to death and start living. The cafe is for your heart. I know you love that place, even though it doesn't love you back. Make it better. Make it the kind of place where people like us, the lonely, the struggling, the invisible, can find community and comfort. Make it what my Maggie always dreamed it could be. The trust is for your purpose. You have a gift, Eli. You see people. You see their pain, their dignity, their humanity. Use that gift to help others the way you helped me. Build something that outlasts both of us. There's a key attached to this letter. It opens my private office at 1847 Park Avenue, 42nd floor. Go there when you're ready. There's something I want you to understand about why I chose you. One more thing. Tell Ben I'm sorry I won't be there to teach him chess, but tell him that I'll be watching from wherever old men go when they die, and I'll be cheering him on. Tell him that his drawing is framed on my desk where I could see it every day until the end. Tell him that in my last days, he made me remember what joy felt like. You're a good man, Eli Martinez, a good father, a good soul. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. With gratitude and respect, Henry P.S. The lawyers will try to make this complicated. They'll talk about tax implications and trust structures and legal obligations. Ignore them. The only thing that matters is this. You earned this by being exactly who you are. Never forget that. Eli's tears had blurred the words by the end, but he'd read every single one. He sat there in that glass conference room overlooking Central Park, holding a letter from a dead man who'd seen something in him that he'd never seen in himself. A soft knock on the door. Anderson entered, his expression gentle. "Take all the time you need." "I don't understand." Eli's voice was hoarse. "Why me? He had a family, people who'd known him for years. Why leave all this to a stranger?" Anderson sat down across from him. "May I tell you something about Henry Whitmore? Something his daughter and grandson never knew?" Eli nodded. After his wife Maggie died, Henry tried to kill himself 3 times. Pills, mostly. We found him, got him help, but the truth is he didn't want to be saved. He spent 7 years just existing, going through the motions. He cut off his family because looking at them reminded him of everything he'd lost. He sold his houses, gave away most of his possessions, and prepared to let himself fade away. Anderson's voice grew softer. Then, 2 months ago, he called me. Do you know what he said? He said, "I met someone who cut my toast. I thought he'd gone senile. But he kept calling, kept talking about this man at the cafe who showed him kindness without wanting anything in return, who had his own struggles but still took time to help, who reminded him of Maggie and the way she used to see the world." "I didn't do anything special," Eli whispered. "That's exactly why it mattered. You didn't know who he was, didn't know he was worth millions, didn't know that helping him might lead to anything. You just helped, because that's who you are." Anderson smiled. "Henry called you the son I should have had. Not his daughter, not his grandson, you." The weight of those words nearly crushed Eli. "So no," Anderson concluded. "This isn't charity. This isn't some old man's crazy whim. This is a father figure recognizing his son. This is a lonely man thanking the person who made his last days worth living. This is Henry Whitmore ensuring that the kindness you showed him can ripple outward to help others." Eli looked down at the key attached to Henry's letter. "He said to go to his office." "What's there?" "I don't know. He never let me inside those last weeks. Said it was private, but he was very insistent that you see it." Anderson stood, handing Eli a business card. "The address is on here. Go whenever you're ready. The building security has been notified." "And Eli?" "Yes?" "Welcome to a life you never imagined but absolutely deserve. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Use it. Make Henry proud." Eli left the law firm in a daze, walking down Park Avenue like a ghost haunting his old life, while simultaneously inhabiting a new one. His phone buzzed. Sandra, demanding to know when he'd be back. But he couldn't bring himself to answer. Everything had changed in the space of an hour, and Eli's mind couldn't catch up to the reality. He found himself standing in front of 1847 Park Avenue, a luxury residential building that probably cost more per square foot than Eli had made in his entire life. The doorman, having been briefed, waved him through without question. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to heaven. Or maybe descending to hell. Eli wasn't sure which. The hallway was silent, carpeted in deep burgundy with artwork that looked suspiciously like originals. At the end of the hall, a single door, 42D. Eli inserted the key Henry had left him. The door swung open onto a space that took his breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Hardwood floors polished to a mirror shine. But what dominated the room was what covered every wall. Photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, documents, all connected by red string like a detective's conspiracy board. At the center of it all, illuminated by afternoon sunlight, hung a large photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, standing in front of a diner. The sign above her read, "Maggie's Table, where everyone is family." Below the photograph, in Henry's shaky handwriting, "She had the gift. She saw people. Now he has it too." Eli moved closer, his eyes scanning the board. There were articles about the cafe, reviews praising its welcoming atmosphere, features about Maggie's commitment to community. There were photos of Henry and Maggie together, young and old, always with that same expression of deep, abiding love. And then Eli saw them, photographs of himself. Recent photographs taken from outside the cafe. Eli serving customers, Eli cleaning tables, Eli cutting toast for Henry, Eli walking with Ben. Beside each photo, Henry had written notes. Patient with difficult customers. remembers everyone's order, smiles even when exhausted, treats his son with such gentleness, has Maggie's heart. That last note was written in larger letters, underlined 3 times. Eli's legs gave out. He sat on the floor of Henry's office, surrounded by evidence that the old man had been watching him for weeks before their first conversation, that Henry had been looking for someone, not anyone, but the right someone, to carry forward a legacy that had died with his wife. On Henry's desk, encased in an expensive frame, was Ben's drawing, the one showing the 3 stick figures at the coffee shop, and beside it, a note. If I'd had a grandson like this, maybe everything would have been different. But perhaps it's not too late. Perhaps this is how I save what Maggie and I built, by giving it to someone who understands what it means to see people, to really see them. Eli sat there until the afternoon light faded into evening, reading every note, examining every photo, trying to understand the enormity of what had just happened. Henry hadn't been a lonely old man who'd randomly chosen him. Henry had been on a mission, searching for someone worthy of his wife's dream, and somehow, impossibly, he'd decided that Eli, broke, exhausted, invisible Eli, was that person. When Eli finally left the office, locking the door behind him, the sun was setting over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded him of hope. For the first time in 8 weeks, no, for the first time since Marie died, Eli allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. He called Mrs. Chen. "How's Ben?" "He's wonderful, dear. We made cookies." "How are you?" Sandra called looking for you. She sounded angry. "Tell Ben I'll be home soon. And Mrs. Chen, everything's going to be different now. Better. I promise." "Are you all right, Eli? You sound strange." "I'm more than all right. I'm going to be able to pay you properly for watching Ben. I'm going to be able to give him everything he deserves. I'm going to be able to breathe." As Eli walked toward the subway, his phone buzzed with a text from Anderson. "Congratulations again. Henry would be proud. Call me tomorrow and we'll start the paperwork. Your life begins now." Eli looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Thank you, Henry," he whispered. "I won't let you down. I promise I'll make Maggie's dream come true. I'll make sure everyone who walks through those doors is seen, is valued, is family." Somewhere in the universe, Eli liked to imagine that Henry heard him, and that beside him, a woman named Maggie smiled and said, "I told you so. I told you there were still good people in the world." Eli walked home to his son, carrying in his pocket a key to a new future. In his heart, a responsibility he'd never asked for but would honor anyway. And in his mind, a promise to an old man who'd seen him when he was invisible. The story was only beginning, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Eli couldn't wait to see what happened next. The subway ride home felt surreal, as if Eli had stepped through a portal into an alternate dimension where impossible things happened to ordinary people. His reflection in the dark window looked the same: tired eyes, worn jacket, hands that bore the evidence of too much work. But everything inside him had shifted. The weight he'd been carrying for 11 months hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something that felt almost like possibility. When he finally climbed the 4 flights to his apartment, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway, her weathered face creased with concern. "Eli, what's going on? Sandra called 3 times. She said if you don't show up tomorrow, you're fired." Eli smiled, and it felt strange on his face, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use properly. "Let me pay you for today, Mrs. Chen, and let me pay you what I actually owe you for the last 11 months. "What are you talking about? You paid me?" "No, I paid you what I could afford, which was nowhere near what your time was worth." He pulled out his wallet, suddenly aware of how thin it was, how the bills inside represented desperate mathematics: gas money versus groceries, electricity versus heat. Starting tomorrow, things are going to be different, very different. Mrs. Chen's eyes narrowed. "Did you rob a bank?" The question was so absurd that Eli laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Marie's funeral. "No, Mrs. Chen, someone robbed a bank 70 years ago, built an empire, and decided to give some of it to me because I cut his toast." "You're not making sense, dear. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling like I can finally breathe. Come on, let's go get Ben. I have a lot to tell him. Ben was sitting at Mrs. Chen's kitchen table, surrounded by cookie crumbs and colored pencils, working on another drawing. When he saw Eli, his face lit up with pure, uncomplicated joy. Daddy, look what I made. It's a picture of when I grow up. See? I'm going to be an artist and you're going to be happy. The drawing showed two stick figures, one small with wild hair holding a paintbrush, one tall with a smile that actually reached his eyes. Eli's throat tightened. When did you decide I wasn't happy now? Ben's expression turned solemn, carrying that terrible wisdom that children of tragedy develop too early. You pretend to be happy, but at night, when you think I'm sleeping, you cry in the bathroom. I hear you. The words hit Eli like a physical blow. He'd thought he was protecting Ben, thought his son was too young to understand, but children always understood. They just understood differently. Eli knelt down, bringing himself eye level with his son. You're right, buddy. I haven't been happy. Not really. But something happened today. Something that's going to change everything for us. Did you win the lottery? Kind of. Remember Mr. Henry, the man you colored with on Saturday? Ben's face fell. He didn't come today. I made him a chessboard out of paper so we could practice. Is he mad at me? No, baby, no. Eli pulled Ben into his arms, holding him tight. Mr. Henry loved you so much, but he got very sick, and he died yesterday. Ben went rigid in his arms, then started trembling. Like Mommy? Like Mommy, I'm so sorry. But he promised to teach me chess. He promised. Ben's voice broke, tears spilling down his cheeks. Why does everyone I love go away? Eli had no answer for that. No platitude or comfort that could make it better. So he just held his son while Ben cried for an old man he'd known for 2 hours but had loved with the instant, absolute devotion that only children can give. After the tears slowed, Eli said softly, Mr. Henry left you something. He wanted to make sure you knew how much Saturday meant to him. What did he leave me? A promise. He left us the cafe, Ben. Beacon Street Cafe belongs to us now. And he left money. Enough money that I don't have to work 2 jobs anymore. Enough that we can fix everything that's broken. Enough that when you grow up to be an artist, I can afford to be happy watching you. Ben pulled back, his tear-stained face confused. Mr. Henry gave us money? Why? Because I cut his toast. Because you colored with him. Because we made him feel like he mattered when he thought nobody cared anymore. Eli wiped his son's tears with his thumb. Because sometimes, buddy, being kind is the most valuable thing in the world. More valuable than money? Way more valuable. The money is it's just a thank you note for being kind. Ben thought about this with the intense concentration he usually reserved for complex coloring decisions. Finally, he said, I'm sad Mr. Henry is gone, but I'm glad he knows we loved him. Me too, Ben. Me too. Me. That night, after Ben finally fell asleep clutching the paper chessboard he'd made, Eli sat in their cramped living room and tried to plan a future he'd never imagined having. The numbers Anderson had quoted felt abstract, impossible. $500,000. The cafe. $6 million in a trust. These weren't numbers that applied to people like Eli. They were lottery numbers, fantasy numbers, numbers that existed in movies and other people's lives. He pulled out his phone and Googled Henry Whitmore. The search results made his hands shake worse than Henry's ever had. Page after page of articles, photographs, accolades. Henry hadn't just been wealthy, he'd been a titan, a legal legend. A man who'd argued cases before the Supreme Court, who'd represented presidents and corporations, who'd built Anderson, Whitmore and Associates into one of the most prestigious firms in the country. And before all that, he'd been married to Maggie Brennan, daughter of a Brooklyn diner owner who'd refused to let wealth change her values. Together, they'd opened Maggie's Table, a diner in Manhattan that became famous not for its food, but for its heart. Every article about it mentioned the same things. How Maggie knew every customer's name, how she hired people others wouldn't, how she created a space where Wall Street executives sat next to homeless veterans, and everyone was treated exactly the same. The diner had closed 7 years ago when Maggie died of cancer. Henry had sold the building the next day, unable to bear entering it without her. According to one article, he'd become a recluse, cutting off friends and family, living alone in his Park Avenue penthouse, slowly fading from the world. Until 2 months ago, when he'd started going to Beacon Street Cafe, to the same corner booth where he and Maggie had sat 40 years earlier when the cafe was still Maggie's table. Eli's vision blurred. Henry hadn't been looking for just any kind person. He'd been looking for someone who could resurrect what he and Maggie had built, someone who could take their dream and make it live again. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and exhilarating in equal measure. His phone rang. Sandra. Eli stared at the screen, watching her name flash accusingly. Finally, at the last second, he answered. Hello? Where the hell have you been? You walked out in the middle of your shift, didn't answer my calls, and left me short-staffed for the lunch rush. Sandra's voice could have stripped paint. I want you here at 5 a.m. tomorrow to make up for it, and if you're even 1 minute late, I quit. Silence. Then, dangerously quiet. What did you say? I quit, Sandra. I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. Actually, no. Effective right now. I quit right now. You can't quit. You need this job. You're drowning in debt. You have a kid to support. I inherited the cafe, Sandra. Beacon Street Cafe now belongs to me, along with enough money that I'll never have to choose between electricity and groceries again. So yes, I can quit. And I am quitting, effective immediately. The silence stretched so long, Eli thought she'd hung up. Then, you're lying. Henry Whitmore left it to me in his will. The lawyers came today, 4 of them, with bodyguards. They took me downtown and read me the will, and now the cafe is mine. Eli felt a rush of satisfaction saying it out loud. Which means you're fired, Sandra. You've got 2 weeks to find another job. See how you like it. You can't fire me. I've worked there for 8 years. And you've been cruel to me for 11 months. You've made fun of Henry behind his back, called him dead weight, told me I was too soft. Well, turns out my softness just bought me a future, and your hardness bought you unemployment. Eli's voice hardened to match hers. 2 weeks, Sandra, then you're done. He hung up before she could respond, his heart hammering with adrenaline and something that felt suspiciously like joy. He'd never quit anything in his life, had never walked away from a job no matter how terrible, because walking away was a luxury he couldn't afford. But now, he could afford it. Could afford to stop accepting cruelty as the price of survival. Could afford to stand up and say no more without the fear of starvation hanging over his head. The feeling was intoxicating. His phone immediately started ringing again. Sandra, then unknown numbers, then Sandra again. Eli turned it off and sat in the dark, listening to the city sounds filtering through their thin walls, and let himself imagine a different life. A life where he woke up to parent Ben instead of rushing to work. A life where he could afford Ben's field trips without calculating which bill could be paid late. A life where the cafe became what Henry and Maggie had dreamed. A place where everyone mattered, where kindness was the currency, where loneliness came to die. The vision was so beautiful it hurt to look at directly. The next morning, Eli woke with purpose burning in his chest like a bright, clean flame. He made Ben pancakes, real ones, not the instant mix, and sat with him while he ate, actually present instead of distracted by the mental mathematics of survival. Are we really rich now? Ben asked, syrup on his chin. We're really okay now. There's a difference. What's the difference? Rich means you have money. Okay means you have enough. We have enough, buddy. Finally. We have enough. Ben considered this. Can we get a dog? The question caught Eli off guard. A dog? You always said we couldn't afford a dog, but if we have enough now, can we get one? A big one that can sleep on my bed and protect us? Eli's eyes stung. Of course, Ben wanted something to protect them. Of course, his 6-year-old son was still trying to feel safe in a world that had taken his mother and taught him that good things disappeared without warning. Yeah, buddy, we can get a dog, a big one, whatever kind you want. Ben's smile was blinding. Really? You promise? I promise. We'll go to the shelter this weekend and find the perfect one. After dropping Ben at school, walking him right to the classroom door instead of rushing off to work, Eli headed to Anderson's office. The receptionist, briefed on his arrival, treated him like an actual client instead of someone who'd wandered in off the street. "Mr. Martinez, Mr. Anderson is expecting you. Conference room C." The same glass-walled room where his life had changed yesterday now held only Anderson and a small mountain of paperwork. "Good morning, Eli. Coffee?" "Please." "Black." Anderson smiled as he poured. "Like Henry." "Like Henry," Eli agreed, accepting the cup. "I don't know where to start." "Then let's start with the immediate practicalities. The $500,000 has already been transferred to a new account in your name. Here's the information." Anderson slid papers across the table. "The cafe ownership transfer will take about 2 weeks to finalize, but you have full operational control starting today. The trust requires a bit more paperwork. There are tax implications and legal structures we need to establish, but the funds are accessible for approved charitable purposes." Eli stared at the bank account information. The number had too many zeros. "This is real. This is very real. Now, let's discuss what you want to do with it." "I want to make the cafe what Henry and Maggie dreamed it could be. I want to hire good people and pay them fairly. I want to make it beautiful but still accessible. I want—" Eli paused, searching for the right words. "I want to make it the kind of place where lonely old men feel seen." Anderson's expression softened. "Then you understand exactly what Henry intended. Now, let's talk logistics. You'll need to hire a manager, update the facilities, probably renovate the kitchen. I'm prepared to recommend contractors, designers, HR consultants." "Wait," Eli held up his hand. "How much is all this going to cost?" "With your inheritance? Barely a dent. The cafe property alone is worth about $2 million. You could take out a business loan using it as collateral, but honestly, you don't need to. You have liquid assets to cover any reasonable renovation." $2 million. The building where Eli had scrubbed floors and accepted Sandra's abuse was worth $2 million. The absurdity of it made him laugh. "What's funny?" Anderson asked. "I spent 11 months terrified I'd lose that job. Terrified I'd make one mistake and get fired, and Ben and I would end up on the street. And the whole time I was mopping floors in a $2 million building." "Life has an ironic sense of humor," Anderson agreed. "Now, shall we discuss the trust?" They spent 3 hours going over details that made Eli's head spin. Tax structures, investment strategies, charitable disbursement guidelines. Anderson explained everything with patient clarity, never making Eli feel stupid for asking questions, never rushing through the complexities. "The trust requires you to establish a board of directors," Anderson said. 3 people minimum who will help you make decisions about where the money goes. I'm happy to serve as one, but the other positions are yours to fill." "I don't know anyone qualified for something like that." "You know people who understand struggle, people who know what it means to need help and receive none. Those are exactly the qualifications required." Anderson leaned forward. Henry didn't want another charity run by wealthy people deciding what poor people need. He wanted people who've lived it to have the power to change it. The idea was radical and beautiful and terrifying. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need. The trust isn't going anywhere." Anderson gathered his papers. "One more thing. Henry's personal effects are still in his Park Avenue apartment. His daughter doesn't want them. She made that very clear. I think Henry would want you to go through them. See if there's anything that helps you understand his vision." "When can I go?" "Whenever you're ready. I'll have keys messengered to you today." Eli left the law office feeling like he'd completed a graduate course in wealth management taught in a foreign language. His brain hurt from processing information about tax-advantaged giving vehicles and fiduciary responsibilities and investment portfolios. But beneath the confusion was a growing sense of purpose. He had work to do, important work, the kind of work that mattered beyond just survival. His first stop was Beacon Street Cafe. He stood outside for a long moment, seeing it with new eyes. The faded awning, the cracked sidewalk, the window that had been taped together for months, the flickering neon sign that read BA on Street Ka, because the C and the F had burned out years ago. It was ugly and broken and perfect. Eli pushed open the door. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a handful of lingering customers and Sandra behind the counter, her expression poisonous. "So you actually showed up," she said. "Come to gloat? Come to work. I'm the owner now, Sandra. That means I have decisions to make. 2 weeks. You said 2 weeks. I did, and I meant it. You have 2 weeks to transition out, but starting today, things are going to change around here. Tommy, the construction worker who'd complained about Henry, perked up. Change how? Eli addressed the room, his voice carrying. This cafe now belongs to me, and it's going to become what it was always meant to be. A place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, where the staff are paid fairly, where the food is good and affordable, where you can sit for hours over one cup of coffee and nobody will make you feel bad about it. One of the other regulars, an elderly woman who came in 3 times a week, raised a trembling hand. Does that mean you're raising prices? No, ma'am. It means I'm improving everything else and keeping prices the same. How? That doesn't make business sense. It makes perfect sense if profit isn't the only goal, if community is the goal, if dignity is the goal. Eli met Sandra's eyes. If kindness is the goal. Sandra laughed, harsh and bitter. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months. Maybe, but I'd rather be bankrupt trying to do something good than wealthy doing something cruel. He turned to the other server, a young woman named Keisha, who'd always been kind to him. Keisha, can I talk to you for a minute? They stepped outside, leaving Sandra glaring daggers at their backs. What's going on, Eli? Everyone's confused. How much does Sandra pay you? Keisha looked uncomfortable. Minimum wage plus tips. Why? How would you feel about becoming assistant manager? $25 an hour plus tips and benefits. Health insurance, paid time off, the works. Keisha's eyes went wide. Are you serious? Completely serious. I need someone who understands this place, who knows the regulars, who can help me make it better. But I need someone kind, someone who sees people. He smiled. You've always been kind to me, Keisha, even when I was just the guy cleaning toilets. Because you're a good person, Eli. Everyone knows that except Sandra. Keisha's expression turned fierce. And yes, God, yes, I accept. When do I start? Today, right now. Go back in there and work your shift, but from now on, you're management, which means you get to tell Sandra what to do for the next 2 weeks instead of the other way around. Keisha's grin was feral. This is going to be fun. Over the next week, Eli threw himself into transformation with manic energy. He hired contractors to fix everything that was broken. He had the kitchen deep cleaned and the equipment updated. He replaced the cracked floor tiles and the torn booth vinyl. He had the neon sign repaired so it once again read the full name of the cafe. But the corner booth, Henry's booth, he left exactly as it was. Instead, he had it sealed under a clear protective covering and mounted a brass plaque on the wall beside it that read, Henry's Corner, where everyone is seen. The regulars watched these changes with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Change was scary, even good change, even change that promised to make things better. You sure about all this? Tommy asked one morning as Eli supervised the installation of new espresso machines. This equipment costs more than I make in a year. I'm sure. Good coffee shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a standard. But how are you paying for it? Everyone's saying you inherited money, but nobody knows from who. Eli pointed to the plaque by the corner booth. From him. From the man you said I gave too much attention to. From the man who saw that attention and decided it mattered. Tommy had the grace to look ashamed. I was an asshole about that. About him. Yeah, you were. But you're here every morning, so you must like something about this place. Help me make it better instead of tearing it down. How? Start leaving decent tips. Start saying please and thank you. Start seeing the staff as people instead of servants. Eli met his eyes. Start being the kind of customer you'd want to serve. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then, yeah, okay, I can do that. Small victories, small changes, small moments that accumulated into something larger. Sandra's last day came faster than Eli expected. She'd spent 2 weeks undermining every decision he made, criticizing every change, poisoning the atmosphere with her resentment. When she finally clocked out for the last time, nobody said goodbye. You'll fail, she told Eli on her way out. You're too soft, too naive, too willing to believe in people who'll just take advantage of you. Give it 6 months and you'll be begging me to come back. 6 months from now, I'll have created something beautiful, Eli replied calmly, and you'll still be bitter. I know which future I prefer. She left without another word, and the cafe seemed to breathe easier in her absence. Keisha proved to be a revelation. She knew every regular's name, their favorite orders, their personal struggles. She trained new staff with patience and kindness. She turned the cafe from a place of transaction into a space of connection. You were wasted as a server, Eli told her one afternoon. You should have been running this place years ago. Sandra would never have promoted me. Said I was too friendly, that I wasted time talking to customers. Keisha laughed. Turns out talking to customers is exactly what this job should be. Turns out Sandra was wrong about a lot of things. 2 weeks after taking ownership, Eli finally made time to visit Henry's Park Avenue apartment. Anderson had arranged everything, but Eli had been avoiding it, afraid of what he might find, afraid of the weight of Henry's life, the responsibility of his legacy. But he couldn't avoid it forever. The apartment was massive, 4 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of space that existed in architecture magazines and other people's dreams. But it felt empty despite being full of furniture, artwork, decades of accumulated possessions. Eli wandered through rooms that echoed with loneliness. Henry's bedroom was stark. Just a bed, a nightstand, a single photograph of Maggie. The kitchen looked unused, as if Henry had stopped cooking the day she died. The living room was furnished but sterile, like a stage set for a life nobody was performing anymore. But the study? The study was different. Papers covered every surface. Legal pads filled with notes in Henry's shaky handwriting. Photographs arranged and rearranged, telling stories Eli didn't understand. And on the desk, in a place of honor, Ben's drawing in its expensive frame. Eli sat in Henry's chair and began reading the notes. They were letters, he realized. Letters Henry had written but never sent, addressed to people who disappeared from his life or never existed at all. One letter was addressed to Maggie. Eli hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but ultimately began reading. My darling Maggie, it's been 7 years and I still reach for you every morning. I still set 2 coffee cups out before remembering you're gone. I still see things I want to tell you about and turn to speak before the silence reminds me I'm alone. They say time heals. They're liars. Time just teaches you to carry the wound without showing it. Eli's vision blurred. He kept reading. I tried to die, Maggie. 3 times I tried to follow you because living without you felt like drowning in air. All the mechanics of survival, without any of the reasons for it. But I failed at dying like I failed at so much else. And then, by accident, I found the diner. Our diner transformed into something new, but still carrying echoes of what we built. And in that diner, I found a man who reminded me of you. Not in appearance, in spirit, in the way he saw people, really saw them, the way you always did. Eli had to stop reading. His tears were falling on the paper, smudging Henry's words. He found another letter, this one addressed to a daughter who'd never read it. Victoria, I don't know how to reach you anymore. Every conversation becomes a battle. Every interaction feels transactional. You want my money, but not my time. My estate, but not my stories. I look at you and wonder where the little girl went who used to climb into my lap and demand I read her one more chapter. When did you become so hard? Was it my fault, your mother's death, or just the inevitable corruption of time and disappointment? I'm leaving you money because that's what you want from me. But I'm leaving my heart to someone else, someone who reminds me that kindness still exists in this world. Eli spent hours reading these letters, confessions Henry had written to ghosts and strangers and the universe itself. Each one painted a picture of a man who'd had everything and lost the only thing that mattered. A man who'd spent 7 years preparing to die until he found a reason to care about what happened after he was gone. In the bottom drawer of Henry's desk, Eli found plans. Detailed plans for renovating Beacon Street Cafe, architectural drawings, budget projections, lists of community programs the trust could fund. It was all there. Henry's vision laid out in meticulous detail, waiting for someone to execute it. And clipped to the front of the folder, a note in Henry's handwriting. For Eli, when you're ready to begin. Eli sat in that apartment until darkness fell over Central Park, surrounded by the carefully preserved remains of Henry Whitmore's life, and he made a promise to a man who couldn't hear it. "I'll do it right, Henry. I'll make it what you and Maggie dreamed. I'll turn that cafe into a place where lonely people find community, where struggling people find support, where everyone is treated like they matter. I promise." The city lights twinkled outside the windows, indifferent to promises and dreams, and the weight of legacies passed from one generation to the next. But Eli felt different. Felt like he'd been handed not just money, but purpose. Not just resources, but responsibility. He gathered up Henry's plans, turned off the lights, and locked the door on a life that had ended so his could truly begin. The subway ride home was crowded and uncomfortable, but Eli barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead, planning, imagining, building something beautiful from the ashes of loss. When he got home, Ben was waiting up despite the late hour, drawing another picture at the kitchen table. "Where were you, Daddy?" "Visiting Mr. Henry's house, saying goodbye properly." "Did you tell him about the dog we're getting?" Eli smiled. "I did. He would have approved." "What's this?" Ben pointed to the folder of plans Eli had brought home. "This is how we're going to change the world, buddy, one cup of coffee at a time." Ben studied his father with those two wise eyes. "Are you happy now, Daddy? For real happy?" Eli pulled his son into his arms, holding him close. "Yeah, Ben. For the first time in a long time, I'm for real happy." And the incredible thing was that it was true. The renovation of Beacon Street Cafe began on a Monday morning that felt like the first day of creation. Eli stood on the sidewalk at dawn, watching contractors unload equipment, and felt the same nervous excitement he'd experienced the day Ben was born. That sense of bringing something new and precious into the world, knowing you were responsible for keeping it alive. "You sure about closing for a whole month?" Keisha asked, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "Some of the regulars are already complaining they don't know where to go for breakfast." "I gave everyone a list of other diners nearby, and I promised we'd reopen better than before." Eli accepted the coffee gratefully. "Besides, we can't do this halfway. Henry didn't do anything halfway. Henry also had $87 million. You're working with a fraction of that. A fraction of $87 million is still more money than I ever imagined having." Eli sipped his coffee, watching the sun paint the buildings across the street in shades of gold. "And it's not about how much we spend, it's about doing it right." The lead contractor, a woman named Rosa, who'd come highly recommended by Anderson, strode over with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. "Mr. Martinez, we need to make some decisions about the kitchen layout. The current configuration violates about 6 different health codes. Fix whatever needs fixing. Just preserve the character of the place." "Character is great until the health inspector shuts you down." Rosa flipped through her notes. "I'm recommending we gut the kitchen entirely, start from scratch. New equipment, new ventilation, proper spacing. It'll cost about $40,000 more than the original estimate." Eli's old instinct screamed at him that $40,000 was an impossible, terrifying amount. But his new reality whispered that $40,000 was an investment in doing things right. "Do it." "But Rosa?" "Yeah?" "That corner booth stays exactly as it is. I don't care if you have to build the entire renovation around it. That booth doesn't get touched." Rosa glanced at the protective covering over Henry's booth, at the brass plaque on the wall. "The one with the memorial?" "That one. It's sacred ground." Something in Eli's tone made Rosa nod without argument. "Understood. We'll work around it." Over the next 4 weeks, Eli watched Beacon Street Cafe transform from a tired relic into something that honored both its past and its future. The contractors stripped away decades of neglect, revealing good bones beneath the decay. Original tile work emerged from under cheap linoleum. Brick walls appeared where drywall had hidden them. The space began to breathe again, remembering what it had been when Maggie first opened those doors. But Eli wasn't trying to recreate Maggie's table. He was trying to build something that carried its spirit forward. New booths in warm burgundy leather, tables made from reclaimed wood. Lighting that was bright enough to read by, but soft enough to feel intimate. A color palette of cream and deep red that felt both classic and welcoming. The kitchen became a marvel of modern efficiency. Stainless steel and proper ventilation, and equipment that didn't sound like it was dying every time someone turned it on. But Eli insisted on keeping the old coffee maker, the one Henry had drunk from every morning. Rosa had it professionally restored and mounted on a place of honor behind the counter. That's a health code violation, she pointed out. Then we won't use it. But it stays. That machine made Henry's last cups of coffee. It's part of the story. Ben visited the construction site every day after school, hard hat perched on his small head, asking endless questions about measurements and materials and whether the workers ever got scared being up so high on ladders. The crew adopted him as a mascot, teaching him about levels and load-bearing walls and the satisfying sound of a perfectly driven nail. Your kid's got a good eye, Rosa told Eli one afternoon. He spotted a measurement error I missed. Kid might be an architect someday. Or an artist, or astronaut, or whatever he wants. Eli watched Ben carefully sketching the cafe layout in his notebook. That's the whole point of all this, giving him the freedom to become whoever he's meant to be. Henry would be proud, Rosa said quietly. I looked him up after you hired me, read about what he and his wife built. This is a hell of a legacy to inherit. Sometimes I wake up terrified I'm going to mess it up, that I'll dishonor what they created. But you know what I think? I think the fact that you're terrified means you'll get it right. It's the people who aren't scared who screw things up. Rosa clapped him on the shoulder. You're doing good work here, Eli. Trust yourself. While the cafe underwent its physical transformation, Eli worked on assembling the board for the Whitmore Legacy Trust. Anderson had agreed to serve, bringing legal expertise and institutional knowledge. For the second position, Eli approached Mrs. Chen. Me? She'd stared at him like he'd suggested she fly to the moon. I'm just a babysitter, Eli. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about struggle. You know what it's like to work 3 jobs and still worry about making rent. You know which bills get paid and which ones get ignored. You know exactly what people need because you've needed it yourself. Eli had taken her hand gently. That's worth more than any MBA, Mrs. Chen. Henry wanted people who understood on this board, not people who theorized. But I don't even have a college degree. Neither do I, but we both have something better. We have empathy. We have experience. We have hearts that break when we see people suffering. He'd squeezed her hand. Please, help me make sure this money goes to people who actually need it. Mrs. Chen had cried. Then she'd said yes. For the third position, Eli chose Keisha. She'd protested even more vigorously than Mrs. Chen, insisting she was too young, too inexperienced, too new to management. But Eli had been insistent. You're 26 years old and you've been supporting your grandmother and 2 younger siblings since you were 18. You've made $1 stretch further than should be physically possible. You've worked jobs that treated you like you were disposable, and you never let it make you cruel. Eli had met her eyes steadily. You're exactly who should be deciding how to help people, Keisha, because you know what help actually looks like. The first official meeting of the Whitmore Legacy Trust Board happened in the cafe's back office 3 weeks into the renovation. The space was cramped and smelled like fresh paint, but the 4 of them squeezed around a folding table with coffee and determination. Okay, Eli said, feeling wildly out of his depth. I guess we should start with what Henry wanted. He specified that the trust should focus on supporting single parents and small businesses, people who are working hard but can't quite make it over the finish line. How much are we working with? Mrs. Chen asked, pen poised over a notebook. Anderson consulted his tablet. The trust currently holds $6 million in diversified investments. Conservative estimates suggest we can safely disperse about $300,000 per year without depleting the principal. The number hung in the air like a small miracle. $300,000 every year, forever. That could change a lot of lives, Keisha said softly. It could change everything for about 60 families, Mrs. Chen calculated quickly, if we gave $5,000 to each one. Or it could help 12 people really comprehensively, Anderson suggested. $25,000 each could cover debt, provide startup capital, create actual transformation. They debated for 2 hours, voices rising and falling with passion and disagreement and the messy work of trying to do good in a complicated world. Eli mostly listened, amazed at the intelligence and compassion in the room. These weren't wealthy philanthropists playing at charity. These were people who knew hunger and fear and desperation, trying to build a ladder for others to climb. Finally, Keisha said, "What if we did both? What if we had different grant levels, small emergency grants for immediate crises, rent, medical bills, car repairs, medium grants for people trying to start businesses or go back to school, and then a few large grants for comprehensive support, debt elimination, startup capital, the works. A tiered system, Anderson said approvingly. That's actually brilliant. It allows us to help more people while still providing transformative support where it's most needed. They spent the rest of the meeting hammering out details. Emergency grants up to $2,000, available within 48 hours of application. Development grants between $5,000 and $15,000 for education or business startup. Transformation grants of $25,000 for comprehensive support, limited to 5 recipients per year. How do we choose who gets what? Mrs. Chen asked. There are so many people who need help. We start with the people Henry would have seen, Eli said quietly. The invisible ones. The people working 2 jobs and still falling behind. The single parents who are 1 car repair away from disaster. The small business owners who can't get traditional funding because banks don't believe in them. He looked around the table. We find them and we help them. That's how we honor Henry. As word of the trust spread, applications began arriving. First a trickle, then a flood. Each one was a story of struggle and resilience, of people fighting against odds that shouldn't exist in the wealthiest country on earth. A single mother of 3 who'd been fired for missing work when her son got sick, now facing eviction. A veteran trying to start a landscaping business but lacking the capital for equipment. A teacher working nights at a convenience store to pay off student loans, dreaming of opening a tutoring center for low-income kids. A transgender woman trying to finish her degree while working full-time and fighting discrimination at every turn. Reading the applications broke Eli's heart and rebuilt it stronger. Each story reminded him of his own desperate months after Marie died, when every day was a battle against drowning and no help was coming. The board met twice a week to review applications. They argued, cried, laughed, and occasionally threw wadded paper at each other when disagreements got heated. But they always found consensus eventually, guided by a simple question. Would helping this person create ripples of good that extended beyond just them? Their first emergency grant went to a woman named Patricia whose car had died, threatening her ability to get to her 2 jobs. $2,000 bought her a used but reliable vehicle. She sent them a video message 2 weeks later, tears streaming down her face as she thanked them for saving her life. You don't understand, she'd said. I was 1 paycheck away from losing my apartment. My kids would have ended up in foster care. You didn't just fix my car. You kept my family together. And Keisha had played that video 3 times, crying harder each time. This is why we're doing this right here. Their first transformation grant went to Marcus, a formerly incarcerated man trying to open a restaurant but unable to get funding because of his record. $25,000 covered commercial kitchen equipment, licensing fees, and 3 months of operating capital. His restaurant, Second Chances, opened 6 months later and immediately became a neighborhood fixture, known for hiring people others wouldn't and serving food that tasted like love. By the time Beacon Street Cafe reopened, the trust had helped 43 people. 43 lives changed. 43 ripples spreading outward. The cafe's grand reopening happened on a Saturday morning exactly 2 months after Henry's death. Eli had insisted on the timing. Henry had loved Saturdays, the day Ben had colored with him, the day everything had changed. At 6:00 a.m., a line stretched down the block. Old regulars mixed with curious newcomers, all waiting to see what Eli had built. Tommy stood near the front, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes. Mrs. Chen had brought half her building. Keisha's entire family had shown up for support. Even some of the grant recipients had come, wanting to thank the man who'd helped them. You ready? Keisha asked, standing beside Eli at the locked door. Absolutely not. Let's do it anyway. Eli unlocked the door and the crowd flooded in, their reactions immediate and visceral. People stopped, stared, touched the walls like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The space glowed with warmth and welcome, every detail considered, every corner designed for comfort. But it was Henry's corner that drew everyone's attention. The preserved booth under its clear protective covering, the brass plaque catching the light, the old coffee maker mounted above it like a religious icon. People approached it reverently, reading the inscription, understanding without being told that this was sacred space. Tommy was the first to speak, his voice rough with emotion. You really did it. You made it beautiful. We made it beautiful, Eli corrected. All of us. Everyone who believed it could be better. The first customer to sit in a booth was a homeless veteran named Jerome, who'd been coming to the cafe for years, usually buying nothing because he had nothing to buy with. Eli approached him with a menu and a smile. Good morning, Jerome. What can I get you? Jerome shifted uncomfortably. I'm just getting warm. I'll leave when it gets crowded. You'll do no such thing. Breakfast is on the house today. For everyone. What would you like? You can't afford to give away free food. I can afford whatever creates community. Now, eggs or pancakes? Jerome's eyes filled with tears. Pancakes, if it's really okay. It's more than okay. It's exactly what this place is for. By noon, Eli had served 300 people. Some paid, some couldn't, all were welcomed exactly the same. The coffee was excellent, the food was honest, and the atmosphere hummed with the kind of energy that happens when people feel genuinely seen. Ben spent the day at Henry's corner, showing people his drawing that Henry had loved, telling anyone who'd listen about the old man who'd promised to teach him chess. An elderly woman sat with him for an hour, teaching him basic chess moves on a board she'd brought specifically for that purpose. Mr. Henry wanted you to learn, she said, so I'm teaching you for him. That's how we keep people alive, by finishing what they started. Victoria Whitmore Chase chose that moment to make her entrance. She swept through the door like a cold front, her designer clothes and hostile expression creating an instant bubble of space around her. Conversation didn't stop exactly, but it muted, people sensing conflict the way animals sense approaching storms. Eli saw her immediately, felt his stomach drop, forced himself to approach with professional courtesy. Ms. Whitmore Chase, welcome. Can I get you something? You can explain to me why my father left you everything. Her voice carried across the cafe, designed to shame. You're a nobody, a coffee pourer. What did you do to manipulate him? The cafe went silent. Every eye turned toward them. Eli kept his voice calm, gentle even. I didn't manipulate anyone. I just treated your father with kindness. I'm sorry if that's hard for you to understand. Kindness. She spat the word like a curse. You saw a vulnerable old man and you took advantage. You probably fed him sob stories about your dead wife and your poor little son, playing on his emotions. That's enough. Anderson had appeared from somewhere, his presence commanding immediate attention. Ms. Whitmore Chase, your father left a very clear will. He was evaluated by multiple physicians. His decisions were sound and legal. If you continue to harass Mr. Martinez, I'll be forced to pursue legal action against you for slander. He stole my inheritance. He inherited what your father chose to give him. There's a difference. Anderson's voice could have cut glass. Your father left you $5 million. Most people would consider that generous. Most people aren't his only child. That money should have been mine. This cafe should have been mine. Everything should have been mine. Why? The question came from Ben, who'd approached without anyone noticing. His 6-year-old voice cut through Victoria's rage like a knife through fog. Why should it be yours if you never visited him? Mr. Henry was lonely. He told me. He said his family didn't want him anymore. Victoria's face went white, then red. You don't know what you're talking about, child. I know Mr. Henry was sad until he met my dad. I know he smiled when we colored together. I know he said I made him happy. Ben's voice remained steady, carrying the terrible honesty of children. If you made him happy, he would have given you stuff. But you made him sad. So he gave it to people who made him happy instead. That's fair. The logic was so simple, so devastating, that Victoria had no response. She stood there, mouth working silently, rage and shame and grief warring across her features. You should leave, Eli said quietly. You're not going to find whatever you're looking for here. This isn't over, Victoria hissed. I will contest that will. I will prove he was manipulated. You'll waste your money on lawyers who'll tell you what Anderson already has, that you have no case. Eli felt surprisingly calm, surprisingly clear. Your father made his choice. He chose kindness over blood, connection over obligation, love over law. I'm sorry that hurts you. But I won't apologize for being kind to a lonely old man. Victoria turned and fled, her expensive shoes clicking against the restored tile like accusation marks. The door slammed behind her, and slowly conversation resumed. People returned to their meals, their coffee, their connections. Tommy approached Eli, looking uncomfortable. That took guts, standing up to her like that? It took honesty. That's different. Still, you could have backed down, let her have her tantrum. You didn't. Tommy paused, clearly wrestling with something. I owe you an apology for how I treated you before, for complaining about Henry. I was wrong. You were human. We all are. Eli extended his hand. Fresh start? Tommy shook it firmly. Fresh start. The rest of the day passed in a blur of faces and orders and moments of connection that reminded Eli why he was doing this. An elderly man who ordered the same thing Henry used to order, sitting in a different booth but looking equally lonely. A young mother who cried when Eli comped her meal after noticing her counting change to make sure she had enough. A teenager who sat doing homework for hours, clearly having nowhere else to go, whom Eli kept supplied with hot chocolate and gentle check-ins. By closing time, Eli's feet ached and his voice was hoarse, and his heart was so full it felt like it might burst. Keisha was counting the register while Ben slept in a booth, exhausted from his big day. We did it, Keisha said, looking up with a tired smile. We actually did it. We did. How's the till? We gave away about $800 in free food and still broke even. People tipped crazy amounts when they realized what you were doing. She showed him the tip jar, overflowing with bills. Most of this was from people who could barely afford to eat here. They wanted to contribute. Put it in the trust. If people want to contribute to helping others, we should honor that. The door chimed and Eli looked up, ready to tell whoever it was that they were closed. But it was Marcus from Second Chances, carrying 2 large containers that smelled incredible. Heard you were feeding the neighborhood all day, Marcus said with a grin. Figured you might be hungry. Made you my special lasagna and some garlic bread. Marcus, you didn't have to. You gave me $25,000 and a chance at a life I never thought I'd have. I can't pay that back, but I can feed you. He set the containers on the counter. Besides, we're family now. People who help each other are family. After Marcus left, Eli sat at the counter and ate lasagna that tasted like gratitude while Keisha finished closing and Ben slept peacefully in his booth. Through the window, he could see Beacon Street settling into evening, lights coming on in apartments above shops, people heading home after long days, the endless rhythm of the city. His phone buzzed. A text from Anderson. Henry's daughter withdrew her legal challenge. Her lawyer told her she had no case and would only embarrass herself further. Congratulations, the will is settled. Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was over. Victoria couldn't take this away. The cafe was his. The trust was secure. Henry's legacy was safe. He looked at Henry's corner, at the brass plaque gleaming in the low light, and whispered, We did it, Henry. We're keeping it alive. We're making sure lonely people find connection. We're making sure everyone is seen. Somewhere in the universe, Eli imagined, Henry heard him. And maybe, just maybe, he smiled. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. Eli woke up without the desperate anxiety that had been his constant companion. He made Ben breakfast and actually ate with him instead of gulping coffee while running out the door. He walked Ben to school, kissed him goodbye, and headed to the cafe not because he'd be fired if he was late, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. The cafe became exactly what Henry had envisioned, a place where everyone belonged. Business people in suits sat next to construction workers in paint-splattered jeans. Teenagers doing homework shared tables with retirees reading newspapers. The homeless were welcomed as warmly as the wealthy, and somehow, miraculously, everyone seemed to understand that this space operated under different rules than the rest of the world. Eli hired carefully, looking for people who had Henry's gift of seeing others. A formerly homeless woman named Deshawn became the morning cook, bringing both skill and stories that reminded everyone where they'd come from. A college dropout named Jamie worked the counter with the kind of enthusiasm that came from finally finding a place that valued who you were over what you'd achieved. An elderly Vietnamese woman named Lan handled the baking, arriving at 4 o'clock a.m. to make pastries that tasted like love and patience. Each staff member had a story. Each had struggled. Each understood on a cellular level what it meant to be overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, and each brought that understanding to their work, creating an atmosphere of radical welcome that customers felt the moment they walked through the door. The trust continued its work, steadily helping people claw their way towards stability. They funded a single father's CDL training so he could get a better-paying truck driving job. They covered 3 months of rent for a woman escaping domestic violence. They bought equipment for a disabled veteran starting a handyman business. They paid for a teenager's college application fees when her school counselor said she wasn't college material. Each grant came with a handwritten note from Eli. "Someone once helped me when I didn't know I needed it. Now I'm passing it forward. Use this to build something beautiful." One afternoon in late December, 3 months after the cafe reopened, Eli was restocking coffee beans when a well-dressed man in his 60s entered and stood staring at Henry's corner for a long time. Something about his posture, the weight in his shoulders, the sadness in his eyes, made Eli approach gently. "Can I help you with something?" The man started as if waking from a dream. "I'm sorry, I knew Henry. We were law partners for 30 years. I heard about what happened, what he did, and I had to come see." He gestured at the cafe. "This is remarkable. It's what he wanted, what he and his wife dreamed about." "Maggie," the man smiled sadly. "God, I loved her. We all did. When she died, Henry just disappeared. We tried to reach him, tried to help, but he'd built these walls we couldn't get through." He looked at Eli with something like wonder. "Somehow you got through. I didn't try to get through. I just treated him like a person." "That's all anyone wants, isn't it? To be seen as human." The man extended his hand. "I'm Robert Chen. I run a nonprofit that helps refugees resettle. I've been doing it for 20 years with barely enough funding to keep the lights on. I heard about your trust, about what you're trying to do, and I thought—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "You thought you'd apply for a grant," Eli finished. "Is that inappropriate? Coming here in person?" "It's perfect. Tell me about your work." They sat at Henry's corner. Eli couldn't think of a better place for the conversation, and Robert talked for an hour about families fleeing violence, about children who'd lost everything, about the desperate inadequacy of the systems meant to help. His passion was evident, his commitment unquestionable, his need genuine. "How much would change things for you?" Eli asked. "Honestly, $25,000 would be transformative. We could hire a full-time caseworker, expand our housing assistance program, provide better English classes." Robert's eyes were bright. "We could actually help people instead of just processing them through a broken system." "Consider it done." Robert blinked. "Just like that? Don't you need to review my application, check my credentials, verify—" "I just spent an hour listening to you talk about helping people with the kind of specificity that only comes from doing the actual work. You knew about the 13-year-old girl who's struggling because the school system doesn't understand trauma. You knew about the grandmother raising 6 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment. You knew their names, Robert. That tells me everything I need to know." Eli smiled. "Besides, you were Henry's friend. That's recommendation enough." Robert's composure crumbled. He put his face in his hands and wept, great shaking sobs that contained years of struggle and frustration and the sudden, overwhelming relief of being helped. When he finally composed himself, Robert said, "Henry was right about you. He called me, about a week before he died. First time he'd reached out in 6 years. He said, 'I found someone who remembers what it means to be human, someone who will carry forward what we built.' I didn't understand then. I do now." "What else did he say?" "He said, 'Tell everyone that it's not too late, that kindness isn't weakness, that seeing people, really seeing them, is the most radical act possible in a world that wants us to look away.'" Robert met Eli's eyes. He said, I'm dying, but I'm not afraid anymore because I know the work will continue." Eli's vision blurred. "I hope I'm worthy of that faith." "You are." This cafe, the trust, the way you're helping people, you're exactly what he believed you'd be. That night, after Ben was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Eli sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to anyone living, not to anyone who could read it, but to Henry, wherever he was, whatever came after. Dear Henry, I think I'm finally understanding what you wanted me to see. It's not about the money, though the money helps. It's not about the cafe, though the cafe matters. It's about remembering that every person you meet is carrying something heavy, is fighting battles you can't see, is one act of kindness away from either breaking or healing. You taught me to see that. Not with words, but with your presence, with your trembling hands and your lonely breakfasts and your desperate need to be treated like you mattered. I see people now, Henry. Really see them. The way you saw me, the way Maggie saw everyone. And I'm teaching Ben to see them too. Your legacy isn't the money or the building or even the trust. Your legacy is the gift of sight, the ability to look at someone and recognize their humanity. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for changing my life by letting me change yours. I promise I'll keep seeing people. Every day. For the rest of my life. I promise. He folded the letter and put it in the box where he kept important things. Ben's birth certificate, Marie's wedding ring, the first drawing Ben ever made him. It seemed right that Henry's memory should live there, among the most precious pieces of his life. Christmas came and Eli and Ben spent it at the cafe, serving a free dinner to anyone who showed up. Over 200 people came, bringing the warmth of community to a day that could be desperately lonely. Jerome, the homeless veteran, played Santa Claus with surprising enthusiasm. Deshawn cooked a feast. Keisha organized games and carols. Ben handed out presents donated by customers. Small things, but things that meant someone had been thought of, remembered, seen. At the end of the night, as snow began to fall outside and the last guests were leaving, Tommy approached Eli with his characteristic discomfort around emotions. This was good, really good. My family doesn't really do holidays anymore after my divorce, so this was nice. You're always welcome here, Tommy, holidays or not. I know, that's what makes it matter. Tommy pulled out his wallet and removed several folded bills. For the trust. It's not much, but I want to help. Eli looked at the money, maybe $60, and understood it represented sacrifice. Tommy didn't have money to spare. This was his way of joining something larger than himself. This is exactly the right amount, Tommy. Thank you. After everyone left, Eli and Ben stood at the window, watching snow dust Beacon Street in white. The cafe glowed behind them, warm and welcoming, ready for whatever tomorrow brought. Daddy, Ben said sleepily, leaning against Eli's leg, do you think Mr. Henry can see us? Do you think he knows we're keeping his cafe nice? I think he knows, buddy. I think he's very proud. I miss him. Is that weird? I only met him once. It's not weird at all. Some people make an impression that lasts forever, even if you don't know them for long. Eli lifted Ben into his arms. Mr. Henry was one of those people. Like Mommy? Like Mommy. They stood there together, father and son, holding each other in the glow of something Henry and Maggie had built decades ago, something that had died and been resurrected, something that would continue as long as people remembered that kindness mattered more than profit, that dignity mattered more than efficiency, that seeing people, really seeing them, was the whole point of being human. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, making everything new again. The new year arrived with the kind of cold that made your bones ache and your breath visible in clouds. Eli stood at the cafe window at dawn, watching the city shake off sleep, and felt the weight of what he'd built settling into something that felt almost like permanence. 6 months ago, he'd been drowning. Now he was breathing. The difference was everything. You're here early, Keisha said, letting herself in through the back door, stamping snow from her boots. Couldn't sleep? Slept fine. Just wanted to see the sunrise from here. It's different when you own the place you're standing in. Still can't believe it sometimes, can you? Eli shook his head. Every morning I wake up thinking I'm going to open my eyes and be back in that one-bedroom apartment, scrambling to figure out how to pay rent. Then I remember this is real. That Henry was real. That all of this actually happened. Keisha moved beside him, and they stood together watching steam rise from manhole covers and early commuters hurry past with their heads down against the wind. "You know what I think about?" she said. "I think about all the people Henry could have chosen. Rich people, famous people, his own family. And he chose you because you cut his toast, because you were kind when you had every reason not to be. That gives me hope, Eli. That kindness still matters that much. It has to matter. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" The morning rush began, and with it came the familiar choreography of coffee and conversation and connection. But something was different today. Eli noticed it in the way people lingered, in the quiet conversations happening at tables, in the way strangers were sharing newspapers and offering opinions on headlines. "Did you hear?" Tommy said when Eli brought his coffee. "They're closing Roosevelt Elementary. Budget cuts. They're redistributing all the kids to schools across the district." Eli froze. "Roosevelt? That's where Ben goes." "I know. My nephew goes there too, starts next month. They're sending some kids to schools that are 45 minutes away. How are working parents supposed to manage that?" The words hit Eli like a physical blow. Roosevelt was 3 blocks from their apartment. Ben could walk there with friends, could come home for lunch if he forgot it, could run to the cafe after school. 45 minutes away meant bus rides and logistics, and Ben being alone for hours before Eli could pick him up. "There's got to be something we can do," Eli said. "Like what? The district's broke, the city's broke, nobody's got money for neighborhood schools anymore." Tommy's expression was grim. "My sister's talking about moving, trying to get into a better district, but who can afford that?" After Tommy left, Eli couldn't shake the sick feeling in his stomach. He'd thought having money meant being able to fix problems, but some problems were bigger than any one person's bank account. Some problems required systems to change, and systems didn't change just because you wanted them to. That afternoon, while Ben was at school, Eli called an emergency meeting of the trust board. They gathered in the cafe's back office, crowding around the small table that had become their war room for fighting inequality, one grant at a time. "Roosevelt Elementary is closing," Eli said without preamble. "They're scattering the kids across the district. Ben's school is disappearing, and I need to know if there's anything we can do." Mrs. Chen's face went pale. "My grandson goes to Roosevelt. His mother works 2 jobs. How is she supposed to get him to a school 45 minutes away?" "The trust has $130,000 left for this fiscal year," Anderson said, consulting his notes. "But that's not nearly enough to keep a school open. We'd need millions, ongoing millions. It's not feasible." "So we just accept it?" Keisha's voice rose with frustration. "We just let them destroy a neighborhood school because some spreadsheet says it's not worth saving?" "I'm not saying we accept it. I'm saying we need to be strategic." Anderson leaned forward. "What if we don't try to save the school building? What if we create an alternative?" "What kind of alternative?" Eli asked. "An after-school program. Something comprehensive that serves Roosevelt's neighborhood even if the school itself is gone. Tutoring, activities, a safe place for kids to go while parents are working. We could lease space, hire good people, make it free for families who need it." The idea took root in Eli's mind, growing branches and possibilities. Like an extension of what Henry and Maggie built here. A place where kids are seen, where they matter. Exactly! We couldn't replace a full school day, but we could provide crucial support, bridge the gap. Anderson was already making notes. With $130,000, we could run something small but meaningful for a year. After that, we'd need additional funding. "So we'd have 1 year to prove it works," Keisha said. "1 year to show the community this is worth fighting for." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "It's not everything, but it's something. And something is better than nothing." They spent 3 hours sketching out a plan. A program running from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays, giving working parents coverage when school let out, homework help from retired teachers, art and music programs, a meal component so kids weren't going home hungry, transportation support for families whose children were being sent to distant schools. "We'll call it Maggie's Place," Eli said, "after Henry's wife, after the woman who believed everyone deserved to be seen." "Maggie's Place," Keisha repeated, testing the name. "I like it. It feels right." Finding space proved easier than expected. The building next to the cafe had a vacant storefront, formerly a grocery that had closed 2 years earlier. The landlord, a woman in her 70s who remembered Maggie's table, agreed to a below-market lease when Eli explained what they were building. Maggie used to give my kids free lunch when my husband left and I couldn't afford to feed them, she said, eyes distant with memory. Every day for 6 months, she made sure they ate, never said a word about payment, just kept feeding them like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked at Eli with fierce intensity. You use this space to help kids the way she helped mine. That's payment enough. Renovation happened quickly, not because Eli was rushing, but because the community rallied. Tommy and his construction crew volunteered their weekends. Parents painted walls. Teachers donated books and supplies. What had been a gutted retail space transformed into something warm and welcoming, with reading nooks and homework tables and walls covered in bright murals that Ben and other neighborhood kids painted themselves. Ben threw himself into the project with the enthusiasm only 7-year-olds could muster. He designed a welcome sign, helped organize the bookshelf, and appointed himself official greeter. When kids come here, he explained seriously, they need to know someone's happy they showed up. That's important. Where'd you learn that? Eli asked, touched by his son's wisdom. From you, and from Mr. Henry. He was always happy when we showed up. Maggie's Place opened on a Tuesday in February, just 3 weeks after Roosevelt Elementary closed its doors for the last time. 37 kids showed up that first day, bringing their fear and their hope and their desperate need for somewhere safe to exist. Eli had hired carefully for this, the same way he'd hired for the cafe. Ms. Patricia, a retired teacher who'd been denied her pension due to budget cuts, became the program director. 2 college students studying education ran tutoring sessions. Deshawn from the cafe provided snacks that met kids' nutritional needs while tasting like treats. And Mrs. Chen, who'd been watching neighborhood kids informally for decades, became the heart of the operation, the person who knew each child's name, their struggles, their dreams. That first week was chaos, kids testing boundaries, parents uncertain whether to trust this new thing, logistics falling apart and being rebuilt in real time. Eli moved between the cafe and Maggie's Place, like a man trying to be in 2 places at once, which was essentially what he was attempting. On Friday, when he was certain everything was about to collapse from the weight of impossible expectations, something shifted. A girl named Destiny, 9 years old with eyes older than her years, approached Mrs. Chen hesitantly. Is it true we can come here every day? She asked. Even if we don't got homework. Even if you don't have homework, Mrs. Chen corrected gently. And yes, sweetheart, every weekday. This is your space now. Why? The question carried a lifetime of disappointment, of promises broken and support withdrawn. Why would you do this for free? Mrs. Chen knelt down, bringing herself eye level with Destiny. Because someone once did it for me when I needed it, and because you deserve a place where you matter, where you're safe, where people see you as more than just a problem to solve. She smiled. You're not a problem, Destiny. You're a kid, and kids deserve to be kids. Destiny started crying. Then she was hugging Mrs. Chen with desperate strength, and Mrs. Chen was crying too, and Eli had to turn away because his own vision was blurring. This was why they were doing it. Not for recognition or gratitude, but for moments like this, when a child who'd been carrying the world on small shoulders could finally set that weight down, even just for a few hours. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By the end of the second week, they had 67 kids registered. By the end of the month, 93. The space that had seemed too large suddenly felt too small. They expanded into the backyard, creating an outdoor area for games and art projects. They added evening hours twice a week for parents who worked late shifts. They partnered with the local library for additional resources. And slowly, impossibly, it started working. Kids who'd been failing classes began improving. Parents who'd been drowning found breathing room. The neighborhood, which had been fracturing under the weight of systemic neglect, started knitting itself back together. But success brought its own complications. The trust's funds were depleting faster than anticipated. By March, Anderson delivered the news Eli had been dreading. At our current burn rate, we'll be out of money by June. We need to find additional funding or start cutting services. We can't cut services, Keisha said immediately. These kids depend on us now. We made them a promise. Then we need money. Grants, donations, fundraising, something. Eli had an idea, one that had been forming in the back of his mind for weeks. What if we tell Henry's story? What if we show people what kindness can create? You mean go public? Anderson looked skeptical. That's not usually your style. No, it's not. I hate the idea of it. But if sharing what Henry did, what we're doing with what he gave us, inspires others to help, then it's worth the discomfort. Eli looked around the table. We're not asking for us. We're asking for 93 kids who deserve better. They started small. Eli wrote an essay about Henry, about cutting toast and building legacy, about how one old man's loneliness had transformed into community support for hundreds of people. Keisha posted it on social media, expecting maybe a few hundred people to read it. It went viral. Within 48 hours, the essay had been shared over 50,000 times. News outlets started calling. People wanted to interview Eli, wanted to see the cafe, wanted to understand how this was possible. The phone at Maggie's place rang constantly with offers of help, donations, volunteers. Eli was overwhelmed and uncomfortable with the attention, but he forced himself to accept it because the cause mattered more than his discomfort. He did interviews sitting at Henry's corner, telling the story of a lonely old man and a struggling single dad, and the magic that happened when kindness met need. The donations started flowing in, $50 from a retired teacher in Ohio, $1,000 from a small business owner in California, $5,000 from a tech executive who'd grown up in foster care and understood what safe spaces meant for vulnerable kids, $20,000 from an anonymous donor who simply wrote, "For Maggie, for Henry, for everyone they saw." By April, they'd raised enough money to keep Maggie's place running for 2 more years. But more than the money, they'd created something larger, a network of people who believed kindness mattered, who wanted to support spaces where everyone belonged, who remembered what it felt like to be seen when the world looked through them. One evening in late April, Eli was locking up the cafe when a car pulled up outside. A town car, expensive and polished, with tinted windows that spoke of wealth and privacy. The back door opened, and Victoria Whitmore Chase stepped out. Eli's first instinct was to brace for conflict, but Victoria looked different than she had during her angry visit months ago. Smaller somehow, less certain. "Mr. Martinez?" she said formally. "May I speak with you?" "The cafe's closed." "I know. This won't take long." Against his better judgment, Eli unlocked the door and let her in. They stood in the dim space, surrounded by empty tables and the ghosts of 100 conversations. "I saw your essay," Victoria said finally. "About my father. About what you're doing with his money. I'm sorry if it upset you. That wasn't my intention." "It did upset me. Very much, because it made me realize how little I knew my own father." Her voice cracked slightly. "You knew him better in 8 weeks than I did in 47 years. That's a hard thing to accept." Eli said nothing, waiting. "I read every comment on that essay. Thousands of them. People sharing their own stories of loneliness, of being seen, of small kindnesses that changed their lives. And I realized something." Victoria met his eyes, and hers were wet. "I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I never asked what he needed. I saw him as an obligation, an inconvenience, eventually as an obstacle to my inheritance. I never just saw him as a person, as my father, as someone who was hurting. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to help. Not with the money. You clearly don't need my money. But with time, with effort, with showing up." She gestured toward the cafe. "My father built something beautiful here with my mother. Then you rebuilt it when he couldn't. I want to be part of that. If you'll let me." Eli studied her carefully, looking for manipulation or hidden agendas. But all he saw was grief and regret and the tentative hope of someone trying to find redemption. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm a lawyer, corporate law mostly, but I know how to navigate systems. I could help with the trust, with Maggie's place, with whatever you're building next. Pro bono. No strings attached." Victoria's voice steadied. "As Maz seen, I can't change the past. Can't undo ignoring my father when he needed me. But maybe I can honor his memory by helping continue his work." It would have been easy to say no, to hold on to justified anger, to keep Victoria at arm's length, to make her pay for her cruelty. But Eli thought about Henry, about how he'd spent his last days not on revenge, but on building something good, about how he'd chosen redemption over resentment. Okay, Eli said. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 o'clock a.m. to discuss trust applications. You're welcome to join us. Victoria's relief was visible, physical. Thank you. I promise I won't let you down. Don't promise me. Promise your father. She nodded, looking up at the plaque by Henry's corner. I will. I promise, Dad. After Victoria left, Eli sat alone in the dark cafe for a long time. The weight of what they'd built, the cafe, Maggie's place, the trust, the network of people helping people, felt enormous and precious. So many things could go wrong, so many ways it could fail, but it hadn't failed yet. Despite the odds, despite the obstacles, despite the very reasonable expectation that one man's inheritance couldn't possibly transform a community, it was working. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but working nonetheless. His phone buzzed, a text from Ben, sent from Mrs. Chen's phone where he was spending the evening. Dad, I got an A on my book report. Ms. Patricia helped me at Maggie's place. Can we celebrate with ice cream? Eli smiled, typing back, 2 scoops. You earned it. Another text came through, this one from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Martinez, this is Jerome, the vet from the cafe. I wanted you to know I got approved for housing through a program your trust recommended me to. After 3 years on the streets, I'm going to have a home. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Then another, from Destiny's mother. Destiny got her first B on a math test today. She hasn't passed math in 2 years. Whatever you're doing at Maggie's place, it's working. You're saving my daughter. Thank you. The messages kept coming, each one a story of small victories and incremental progress, and lives being changed in ways that were quiet but profound. Eli read them all, let himself feel the weight of them, the responsibility and the joy. This was what Henry had wanted, not gratitude or recognition, but results. People being helped, lives being changed, kindness creating ripples that extended outward in ways that couldn't be measured but could absolutely be felt. Eli finally left the cafe after midnight, walking home through streets that felt different now that he knew the stories behind the windows he passed. The woman in 3C who'd used a trust grant to finish her nursing degree. The family in 7B whose rent the trust had covered during a medical crisis. The teenager in 2F who'd found community at Maggie's place and stopped cutting herself because she finally felt seen. Every window held a story. Every story mattered. And somehow, impossibly, Eli had been given the resources to help write some of those stories toward happier endings. When he got home, Ben was already asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch, worn out from a day of being 7 and brilliant and loved. Eli carried him upstairs, tucked him into bed, and stood watching him sleep the way he'd done 1,000 times before. Your Grandma Marie would be so proud of you, Eli whispered. And Mr. Henry, too. You're growing up to be exactly the kind of person the world needs. Kind, thoughtful, willing to see people for who they are instead of what they can give you. Ben stirred slightly, mumbling something that sounded like, "Love you, Dad," before settling back into deep sleep. Eli thought about Henry in his final days, sitting in that corner booth, watching the world continue without him, feeling invisible and unnecessary. And then Ben sitting with him, coloring and talking and treating him like he mattered. One afternoon of attention from a 6-year-old had given Henry hope, had reminded him that connection was possible, had inspired him to use his death to create life for others. The butterfly effect of kindness was real. One cut piece of toast had saved Eli's life. One coloring session had restored Henry's will to matter. One inheritance had transformed a community, and all of it had started with the simple revolutionary act of seeing another person's humanity and responding to it. Eli walked to his bedroom, changed into pajamas, and lay down in a bed he actually owned in an apartment he could actually afford. Through the wall, he could hear their neighbor's television, the sound of distant sirens, the endless symphony of the city. But beneath all that noise, Eli heard something else. The echo of Henry's voice saying, "You're a good father." The memory of Maggie's dream of a place where everyone was family. The sound of 93 kids laughing at Maggie's place. The quiet gratitude of people whose lives had been touched by the trust. It sounded like purpose, like meaning, like exactly the kind of life Henry had wanted him to build. Eli closed his eyes and let himself feel, maybe for the first time since Marie died, genuinely at peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Not because all problems were solved. They weren't. But because he was doing work that mattered with resources Henry had entrusted to him. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. In the morning, there would be more people to help, more challenges to face, more stories to hear and respond to. But tonight, Eli let himself rest in the knowledge that he'd honored Henry's gift, that he'd taken loneliness and transformed it into community, that he'd proven kindness wasn't weakness, but the strongest force in the world. Somewhere in the universe, Henry and Maggie were watching, and Eli hoped they were smiling. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made the city shimmer and smell like hot asphalt and possibility. Eli stood at the cafe window watching children stream out of Maggie's place with popsicles and artwork, their laughter cutting through the humid air like music. A year had passed since Henry's death. 365 days of building something from the ashes of loneliness and grief. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Keisha said, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Time's weird like that. The important moments stretch and compress until you can't tell if they happened last week or last lifetime." Eli accepted the tea gratefully. "You ever wonder what Henry would think if he could see all this?" "I think he'd tell you to stop wondering and keep working," Keisha smiled. "He wasn't much for sentiment when there was still work to do." She was right. The trust had helped over 200 people now. Maggie's place served 143 kids daily. The cafe had become a neighborhood institution where everyone from CEOs to construction workers sat elbow to elbow sharing coffee and stories. But there was always more to do, more people to help, more loneliness to combat. Victoria had become an unexpected ally in the work. She showed up for every meeting, handled legal complications with ruthless efficiency, and volunteered at Maggie's place twice a week. Eli watched her read to children with a tenderness she'd probably forgotten she possessed, saw her learn her father's gift of seeing people, and understood that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of change. "My father would have liked you," Victoria told Destiny one afternoon, helping the girl with homework. "You remind me of him, actually. Stubborn, smart, determined not to let the world tell you who you're supposed to be." "Did you like your dad?" Destiny asked with the bluntness of children who hadn't learned to soften difficult questions. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I loved him, but I didn't always show it. I was so busy being angry about what I thought he owed me that I forgot to just be his daughter. That's my biggest regret, that I can't tell him I'm sorry, that I finally understand what mattered." "You could tell him anyway," Destiny suggested. "My mom says people who died can still hear us if we talk to them real loud in our hearts." "You think so?" "I know so. I tell my grandma stuff all the time, and I know she hears me because I feel different after. Like she answered even though I can't hear her words." Victoria's eyes glistened. "Thank you, Destiny. I think I'll try that." Later, Eli found Victoria sitting at Henry's corner, her hand pressed against the protective covering, lips moving in silent conversation. He didn't interrupt. Some conversations were meant to be private, even when they happened in public spaces. Ben had grown in that year too, his 7-year-old wisdom deepening into something that sometimes took Eli's breath away. He volunteered at Maggie's place every afternoon, appointed himself welcome committee, and seemed to instinctively know which kids needed extra attention. He'd inherited Henry's gift, Eli realized. The ability to see people's pain and respond to it without making them feel fragile or broken. "There's a new kid coming tomorrow," Ben told Eli one evening over dinner. "Miss Patricia said his name is Marcus, and he just came from foster care and he's scared. I'm going to make sure he knows we're nice." "That's very thoughtful of you, buddy." "Mr. Henry made me feel safe when I was scared. Now I get to do that for other kids." Ben said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That's how it works, right? People help us, then we help other people, and it keeps going forever?" "That's exactly how it works." Henry understood that. Your mom understood that. Now you understand it too. "When I grow up, I'm going to do what you do. Help people and make places where everybody belongs." Eli's throat tightened. You're already doing that, Ben. Age doesn't matter. Heart does. The trust board meetings had evolved into something larger than just grant distribution. They'd become strategy sessions for tackling systemic issues that kept people trapped in poverty. Mrs. Chen had become fierce about education access. Keisha focused on workforce development. Victoria handled policy advocacy. Anderson managed the financial sustainability. And Eli held the center, making sure they never forgot that every application represented a human being with a story that mattered. We need to talk about scaling, Anderson said at their August meeting. We've proven the model works. Maggie's Place is thriving. The grants are changing lives. But we're still only helping people in this neighborhood. What if we expanded? Expanded how? Eli asked, feeling both excited and terrified by the implications. Other neighborhoods? Other cities, eventually. We could franchise the model, provide funding and training for communities that want to build their own version of what we've created here. That would require millions, maybe tens of millions. We don't have that kind of money. Not yet. But we could raise it. Your essay went viral. People care about this work. If we put together a proper fundraising campaign, showed people what's possible when communities invest in each other, we'd lose control, Eli interrupted. It would become this big thing with administrators and boards and people who've never struggled making decisions about how to help people who are struggling. Not if we structure it correctly. Not if we maintain the core principle that people with lived experience lead the work. Anderson leaned forward. Eli, what you've built here is revolutionary. It's proof that kindness scales, that community care works, that investing in people pays dividends that can't be measured in dollars, but absolutely change the world. Don't you want that for more than just this neighborhood? The question haunted Eli for weeks. Did he want to expand? Could he expand without losing the intimacy and authenticity that made this work effective? Was it selfish to keep something good small when it could be large? Or was it wise to protect what worked rather than risk destroying it through growth? He found himself talking to Henry's Corner late at night when the cafe was empty and the city was as quiet as it ever got. I don't know what to do, he'd say to the empty booth. You gave me this responsibility, but you didn't give me a roadmap. How do I know if I'm making the right choice? The booth never answered, of course, but sometimes, in the silence, Eli felt something like clarity. Henry hadn't left him a roadmap because there wasn't one. There was just the work, messy and complicated and requiring constant judgment calls that had no perfect answers. In September, something happened that made the decision for him. A mother from across the city showed up at the cafe with her 2 children, looking desperate and determined in equal measure. I read about what you do here, she said. About Maggie's Place, about the trust, about how you help people. My kids got redistributed to a school an hour away when their school closed. I'm working double shifts trying to keep us housed and fed, but I can't be there when they get home. They're alone from 3 to midnight every day. They're 7 and 9. That's not safe, but I don't have options. Eli's heart broke. I wish I could help, but Maggie's Place only serves this neighborhood. We don't have the capacity. See, then help me start one in my neighborhood. Please. I'll do the work. I'll find the space, recruit the volunteers, handle the logistics. I just need someone to show me how, and maybe some startup funding. Her voice cracked. My babies deserve what your kids have. A safe place. People who see them. I'm begging you. Eli looked at this mother, at her exhaustion and her fierce love and her refusal to accept that her children mattered less than his, and he knew. Anderson was right. This couldn't stay small when the need was so large. When there were mothers like this in every neighborhood, fighting battles that shouldn't exist, desperately trying to protect their children from a system designed to fail them. What's your name? He asked. Sharon. Sharon Davis. Sharon, I'm going to help you, not with advice or a small grant, but with everything. Space, funding, training, support. We're going to build a Maggie's Place in your neighborhood, and then we're going to help other neighborhoods build their own. Because you're right. Your children deserve exactly what ours have. Everyone's children do. Sharon started crying. Then she was hugging him with the desperation of someone who'd been drowning and finally found something solid to hold on to. Thank you. God, thank you. The board approved the expansion plan unanimously. They created a new entity, the Maggie's Table Foundation, dedicated to supporting community-driven programs that provided safe spaces and wraparound services for vulnerable children. Sharon became their first partner, with Eli and the team providing training, funding, and ongoing support. The second Maggie's Place opened in Sharon's neighborhood in November. Then a third in the Bronx in January, started by a retired firefighter who'd lost his grandson to gang violence and wanted to create alternatives for kids being recruited by the streets. Then a fourth in Queens, led by an immigrant community determined to support their working parents. Then a fifth, sixth, seventh. Each location was unique, shaped by its community's specific needs and cultural context. But they all shared core principles: radical welcome, dignity for everyone, programs designed by people who'd lived the struggles they were addressing, and the absolute conviction that every person who walked through their doors mattered. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Eli found himself traveling between locations, troubleshooting problems, training new leaders, raising funds, and constantly fighting the temptation to control everything himself. Letting go was hard. Trusting others to carry the vision was harder, but it was also necessary if this thing was going to grow beyond what one man could manage. Ben came with him sometimes, observing with those wise eyes, asking questions that cut to the heart of complicated issues. Why do some places have more money than others? He'd ask. Or, if everyone knows kids need safe places, why don't they just make them? Or, Dad, why do grown-ups make things so complicated when kids just need to feel safe and seen? Because grown-ups forget sometimes what actually matters, Eli would answer. We get distracted by money and politics and systems. But you're right, it's not complicated. Kids need safety, love, and the feeling that they matter. Everything else is just logistics. By March, 18 months after Henry's death, the foundation supported 23 locations serving over 3,000 children. The cafe had become the flagship, the original location where it all started, still operating on the principles Henry and Maggie had established decades ago. Henry's corner remained sealed, a reminder of where this all began, with one lonely old man and one kind gesture. The trust continued its work too, now supporting not just individuals but entire programs. They funded a mobile health clinic serving underserved neighborhoods. They backed a legal aid project helping families fight unjust evictions. They supported a job training program run by formerly incarcerated people who understood the barriers to employment from experience. Every grant proposal was evaluated by people who'd lived the struggles they were trying to address. Every program was required to center dignity and humanity above efficiency or metrics. And every recipient was reminded of the same thing Eli told them all. Someone helped me when I needed it. Now I'm helping you. Someday, you'll help someone else. That's how we change the world. One act of kindness at a time, multiplied by millions. On a warm evening in late April, exactly 2 years after Henry's death, Eli organized a memorial gathering at the cafe. Everyone came, the regulars who'd known Henry, the staff who'd been transformed by his legacy, the grant recipients whose lives had been changed, the children from Maggie's Place who'd never met him but benefited from his vision. Victoria brought flowers, white roses, Henry's favorite. She placed them by his booth with shaking hands. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for teaching me what matters, for giving me a chance to be better, for loving people so completely that your love outlived you." Jerome, the veteran, spoke about how Henry used to sit in the same booth for hours, and how he'd never felt judged, only seen. "He looked at me like I was a person, not a problem. That kept me alive some days. Knowing one person saw me as human." Tommy talked about learning from Henry that kindness wasn't weakness but the strongest force in existence. "I used to think being tough meant being hard. Mr. Whitmore taught me that real strength is staying soft in a world that wants to make you cruel." Mrs. Chen cried, telling the story of her grandson, now thriving at Maggie's Place, learning that he mattered in a world that often suggested otherwise. "Henry gave my family hope, not with money, though that helped, but with the example of believing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if given the chance." When it was Eli's turn to speak, he stood at Henry's corner with Ben beside him, looking out at a room full of people whose lives had been touched by one old man's decision to leave his legacy to kindness rather than blood. Henry Whitmore was lonely, Eli began. He was grieving. He was invisible to most of the world, just another elderly man taking up space. But he was also brilliant and kind and capable of seeing possibilities that others missed. He looked at a broke single dad struggling to cut his toast and saw someone who might carry forward his wife's dream. He looked at a 6-year-old boy's crayon drawing and saw hope for the future. He looked at a failing cafe and saw a community center. He looked at his own death and saw an opportunity to create life for others. Eli's voice grew stronger. 2 years ago, I was drowning, working 2 jobs, buried in debt, terrified I was failing my son, unable to see any way forward. Then Henry came into my life, not with grand gestures or instant solutions, but with small, consistent acts of recognition. He saw me, really saw me, and that changed everything. Ben tugged Eli's hand, and Eli lifted him up so he could speak into the microphone. Mr. Henry was my friend, Ben said with 7-year-old solemnity. He was sad, but then he wasn't sad anymore because we loved him. Now he's gone, but we keep loving him by loving other people. That's what he wanted. That's what makes him happy in heaven. The room was silent except for the sound of people crying, moved by a child's understanding of legacy and love. Eli set Ben down and continued. Everything you see here, this cafe, Maggie's place and all its locations, the trust, the foundation, the 3,000 kids being served, the hundreds of families helped, all of it started with one simple act. I cut an old man's toast because his hands shook too badly to do it himself. That's it. That's the foundation of everything that came after. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something crucial. You don't need millions of dollars to change the world. You don't need fame or power or special abilities. You just need to see people, to treat them with dignity, to offer kindness especially when you have your own struggles. Those small acts accumulate into something larger than any of us can imagine. Eli placed his hand on the protective covering over Henry's booth. Henry left me money and property, yes, but that's not what changed my life. What changed my life was being seen, being valued, being reminded that I mattered, even when I felt invisible. The money just gave me the resources to help others feel the same way. He pulled out a letter, the one he'd written to Henry months ago and kept in his pocket like a talisman. I wrote to Henry once, trying to explain what he'd given me. I said he'd given me the gift of sight, the ability to see people's humanity and respond to it. But I realized something recently. He didn't give me that gift. I already had it. What Henry did was remind me to use it, to trust it, to build my life around it rather than apologizing for it. Eli looked at Victoria, who was crying openly now. Henry's daughter Victoria is here tonight. When we first met, she was angry. She thought I'd stolen her inheritance. But over the past year, she's become essential to this work. She's learned her father's gift of seeing people, and now she uses it to help others. That's legacy too, not just what we leave behind, but what we inspire others to become. Victoria stood, walking to the front of the room. May I say something? Eli nodded, stepping aside. Victoria's voice was thick with emotion, but steady. My father died thinking I didn't love him, and the terrible truth is, I'd stopped showing it long before he died. I was angry he wouldn't die faster so I could have his money. I'm not proud of that. I'm ashamed of it. But I'm sharing it because I want you to understand what Eli and this work have taught me. She looked around the room. It's never too late to change. Never too late to start seeing people instead of using them. Never too late to choose kindness over cruelty, connection over isolation, love over resentment. My father gave me $5 million I didn't deserve. But Eli gave me something worth more, a chance to become someone my father would have been proud of. Victoria turned to Henry's corner. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took losing you to remember how, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life honoring what you built, what you believed, what you knew about people that I forgot, that everyone deserves to be seen, to matter, to belong. The gathering continued late into the night, with stories and laughter and tears and the kind of community that forms when people united by shared values come together to celebrate what matters. Children played while adults talked. Strangers became friends. And throughout it all, Henry's corner stood as a reminder that loneliness could be transformed into connection. that grief could become purpose, that one person's death could give life to thousands. At midnight, after everyone had left, Eli stood alone in the cafe doing what had become ritual, talking to Henry's memory in the quiet. "We did it, Henry. We made it work. The cafe is thriving. Maggie's place is growing. The trust is helping hundreds of people. Your legacy is alive and expanding and touching lives you never could have imagined." Eli pressed his hand against the booth's covering. "I hope wherever you are, you know you mattered, that your life made a difference, that the lonely old man drinking coffee in the corner transformed into something beautiful and permanent and redemptive." He thought he felt something then. Not supernatural, just the weight of connection across time, the sense that love and kindness and recognition echoed forward in ways that couldn't be measured but absolutely mattered. The next morning, Eli woke to find Ben already dressed and eating breakfast. "Big day today, Dad. It's career day at school, and I'm going to tell everyone about what we do, about helping people and making places where everybody belongs." "Sounds perfect, buddy. What are you going to say?" "I'm going to tell them about Mr. Henry, about how he was lonely and you were kind, and then magic happened. Not real magic with wands and stuff, but the kind that's real, where being nice to people makes good things happen." Ben's face was serious. "And I'm going to tell them they can do magic too. They just have to see people and be kind. That's all it takes." Eli pulled his son into a hug, overcome with pride and love and gratitude for this child who understood the lesson Henry had died teaching. "You're absolutely right. That's exactly all it takes." They walked to school together, hand in hand, and Eli felt the full weight of what the past 2 years had brought. He'd gone from drowning to breathing, from invisible to seen, from desperate to purposeful. He'd transformed a cafe, launched a foundation, helped thousands of people, and most importantly, taught his son that kindness wasn't optional or nice to have, but essential and revolutionary. After dropping Ben off, Eli headed to the cafe. The morning rush was in full swing, with Keisha managing the counter, Deshawn cooking with her usual grace, and Jamie greeting regulars like they were family. The space hummed with the energy of community, of people choosing to start their day in a place where they knew they'd be treated with dignity. A new customer entered, an elderly woman who looked lost and uncertain. Eli watched as Jamie immediately approached her with a warm smile. "Good morning, ma'am. First time here? Let me show you our menu and find you a comfortable seat." The woman's face transformed, suspicion melting into relief. "I just moved to the neighborhood, don't know anyone yet. Saw your cafe and thought maybe—" "You thought right. This is exactly where you're supposed to be." Jamie guided her to a booth near the window. "Coffee's on the house for your first visit. Welcome to the family." Eli smiled, watching the interaction. This was it. This was what Henry had wanted. Spaces where loneliness came to die, where strangers became family, where everyone was treated like they mattered because they did. His phone buzzed. A text from Anderson. "Just closed the deal on funding for 10 more Maggie's Place locations. Also, someone wants to write a book about Henry and what you've built. Interested?" Eli thought about it. A book would mean more attention, more scrutiny, more pressure. But it would also mean Henry's story reaching more people. It would mean inspiring others to see the lonely people in their own lives. It would mean multiplying the impact of one old man's decision to leave his legacy to kindness. He typed back, "Only if we donate all proceeds to the foundation, and only if it's clear this isn't about me. It's about what's possible when we choose to see each other." Anderson's response was immediate. "Perfect. That's exactly what Henry would have wanted." Eli pocketed his phone and moved through the cafe, refilling coffee, clearing tables, and stopping to chat with regulars who'd become friends. This was his life now, not perfect, not without struggle, but meaningful in ways he'd never imagined possible. At Henry's corner, the new woman sat alone, sipping her coffee and watching the cafe with wonder. Eli approached her gently. "How's everything? Coffee okay?" "It's wonderful. I haven't felt this seen in a long time. Since my husband died, actually. Everyone looks through me like I'm already a ghost. I understand that feeling. I've been invisible too. This cafe exists to make sure nobody stays invisible if they don't want to be." "Who created this place? It's special, different from anywhere else I've been. Eli looked at the plaque on the wall. A man named Henry Whitmore and his wife Maggie. They believed everyone deserved dignity and welcome. They built a place where that belief became reality. Then Henry passed that belief on to me, and now we're all working to keep it alive. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I wish more places were like this. I wish the whole world was like this. Maybe it can be. One cafe, one program, one kind act at a time. Eli smiled. What's your name? Dorothy. Welcome, Dorothy. I'm Eli. You're family now. As Eli walked away, he heard Dorothy whisper, Family. I'm family. The word carried so much weight, so much hope, so much desperate need to belong. The day continued its rhythm, and Eli lost himself in the work. The beautiful, difficult, essential work of creating spaces where people mattered. When Ben arrived after school, bursting with excitement about career day, Eli listened to him describe telling Henry's story to his classmates with such passion that his teacher cried. And then everyone wanted to know how they could help, Ben said excitedly. So I told them they could be kind to the lonely kids at school, that they could share their lunch with someone who looks hungry, that they could invite the kid who sits alone to play with them. Small stuff like Mr. Henry taught us. That's not small stuff, buddy. That's everything. That evening, the trust board met to review applications. They'd received over 300 that month, each one a story of struggle, a plea for help, a reminder that the need was endless, but so was the capacity for compassion if people chose to exercise it. They approved 42 grants that night, a single mother getting her GED, a disabled veteran starting a landscaping business, a transgender teenager needing money for college application fees, a family escaping domestic violence needing first and last month's rent, an immigrant community center needing funds for citizenship classes. On and on, each story different but united by the common thread of people fighting to survive and occasionally even thrive in a system designed to make both nearly impossible. 23,000 people helped so far, Anderson announced, across grants, Maggie's Place locations, cafe services, and indirect impact. 23,000 lives touched because Henry Whitmore decided to leave his money to kindness rather than blood. The number was staggering, 23,000, and growing every day. After the meeting, as everyone was leaving, Victoria lingered. Eli, can I tell you something? Of course. I visit my father's grave every Sunday now. I tell him about the work, about the people we're helping, about how I'm finally becoming someone he could be proud of. Her voice cracked. And I swear I can feel him listening, approving, maybe even forgiving me. I think he forgave you a long time ago, Victoria. Probably the day he died, if not before. Parents tend to forgive their children, even when the children can't forgive themselves. Thank you for letting me be part of this, for not holding my anger against me, for showing me that redemption is possible. We all need redemption from something. I needed it from despair and invisibility. You needed it from anger and regret. Henry gave us both the chance to become better. That's what legacy should be, not just what we leave behind, but who we help others become. Victoria hugged him then, quickly and awkwardly, before hurrying out into the night. Eli watched her go, marveling at how much people could change when given the space and support to do so. Later, at home, after Ben was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Eli sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened since that morning 2 years ago, when 4 lawyers walked into the cafe and changed his life forever. He thought about Henry's trembling hands and lonely breakfasts, about Ben's innocent kindness to a stranger, about the weight of inheritance and the responsibility of legacy, about how one man's death had become the catalyst for thousands of people to live better, fuller, more connected lives. Most of all, he thought about the question that had haunted him since the beginning. Had he done right by Henry? Had he honored what Henry and Maggie built? Had he used the gift responsibly? He decided he had. Not perfectly. There had been mistakes and missteps and moments of doubt. But overall, yes. He'd taken loneliness and transformed it into community. He'd taken money and transformed it into dignity. He'd taken one old man's desperate need to matter and transformed it into a network of support that proved everyone mattered. Eli pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. Not to Henry this time, but to everyone who'd come after. The future leaders of Maggie's Place locations, the future recipients of trust grants, the future people who'd sit in Henry's corner feeling invisible and desperate. To whoever reads this, he wrote, you matter. Your struggles are real. Your pain is valid. Your need for connection is fundamental and human. You deserve spaces where you're seen, where you're valued, where you belong. This cafe, this foundation, this work, it all exists because one lonely old man and one struggling single dad remembered that kindness matters more than money, that seeing people matters more than using them, that community matters more than competition. Don't let the world convince you otherwise. Don't let circumstances make you cruel. Don't let invisibility make you believe you don't matter. You do. You always have. You always will. And there are people like Henry, like me, like everyone who's built this work, who will keep proving it to you until you believe it yourself. Welcome. You're home. Your family. You're seen. He folded the letter and placed it in an envelope marked "For the Future." Tomorrow he'd have it framed and mounted by Henry's corner next to the plaque, creating a complete picture of what this place stood for and why it existed. Eli finished his tea and walked to Ben's room, standing in the doorway watching his son sleep. This was why Henry had given him everything, not just to save Eli, but to save Ben, to give this child a chance to grow up knowing his father was happy and purposeful, to model for him what it meant to build a life around kindness rather than just survival. Your mother would be so proud of us, Eli whispered into the darkness. We made it through. We're not just surviving anymore. We're actually living, and we're helping others do the same. That's everything she would have wanted. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of Ben's gentle breathing and the distant hum of the city that never truly slept. Eli stood there for a long moment, feeling the full weight of gratitude for the impossible journey that had brought him here. 2 years ago, he'd been cutting an old man's toast, not knowing it would change everything. Now he was changing lives, building legacy, proving that kindness was the most powerful force in the world when people chose to wield it. Henry Whitmore had been right about him. He did have Maggie's heart. He did see people. He could carry the work forward, and he would. For as long as he lived, Eli Martinez would make sure that Henry's Corner remained a place where loneliness came to die, where strangers became family, where everyone, absolutely everyone, was seen. That was the promise he'd made to a man who'd changed his life by recognizing his humanity, and it was a promise he intended to keep forever. In the morning, the cafe would open again. Children would fill Maggie's Place. The trust would review more applications. The foundation would expand to new neighborhoods. The work would continue, endless and essential and beautiful. But tonight, Eli let himself rest in the knowledge that he'd honored Henry's gift, that he'd transformed loneliness into love, that he'd proven, beyond any doubt, that seeing people, really seeing them, was the whole point of being human. Somewhere in the universe, Henry and Maggie were watching, and Eli knew, with absolute certainty, that they were smiling. The circle was complete. The legacy was secure. The work would continue. And it had all started with 4 simple words from a lonely old man. You're a good father. Those words had saved Eli's life. And through saving his life, they'd changed thousands more. That was the magic Ben had talked about. Not wands and spells, but the alchemy that happened when kindness met need, when recognition met invisibility, when one person chose to see another's humanity and respond to it. It was the oldest magic in the world, and it was the only magic that mattered. Eli closed Ben's door quietly and walked to his own room, ready to sleep and wake and begin again tomorrow. Because that's what the work required, showing up day after day, choosing kindness over cruelty, connection over isolation, love over fear. It was simple. It was revolutionary. It was everything. And it all began at a corner table where an old man sat alone until he wasn't alone anymore, until someone saw him, until everything changed.